All right. And so this is the third training session for the ORMAP group. And let us start with homework. And for Vin, who hasn't been here before, every single day when we start, I ask everyone to at least tell me a couple things that they learned from the previous training. I've been doing two things, but I think we can switch it down to one thing, only to go and get doing some of the additional training here as quickly as possible. I do have to go in and share with you, I was humbled again, and I learned again that, in fact, I need to be careful when I'm talking about annotation, and I apologize for anybody that I might have offended when I was talking about how I dislike annotation. I hate it. And I was reminded of an experience a couple of years ago in which I was literally arguing about annotation with one of my clients, and the assistant director called me into her office and said, "Frank, I know that you're passionate about this, and I know that you believe that in the long run, it will be better for us to go and transition out of annotation." She said, "But remember this, no one likes to have their baby called ugly. So stop calling the baby ugly." And so I'm humbled again, and I apologize. Like I said, if I offended anybody, there are many ways to go and handle text on the maps, and we should just explore all of them. So again, that was my learning experience from last week. Sorry for that. So let's move around. Let's move on to the homework. So who wants to go first? Anybody? Go ahead, Jesse.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I saw
I
you
had more of a
first.
question. I did a similar split like we did in class, where we created a parcel and then we did the align, and then we split it from the larger piece. But after I'd done my split, I realized that I hadn't actually aligned it perfectly. So I had a little sliver that was attached to the bigger piece that shouldn't have been.
Yes.
So I was just curious, what would be your recommendation on how to resolve that? What would be the best and easiest?
Honestly, the best way to do it, I'm assuming that the sliver did not become part of a multi-part parcel. It might have, depending upon where the sliver was located. It might have become multi-part. Usually my recommendation is rather than trying to clean something up afterwards, ArcGIS Pro has a really good undo process. Just undo until you get to that point before you go and do the clip, and then make sure that it's aligned correctly. And then do the clip, and you shouldn't have it. That sliver is being created. If not, then the process is make sure it's not multi-part. All right. You make sure you select it, and then go and use the select, zoom to selected features to see if it is multi-part or not. If it is multi-part, explode it. And then literally you can just take that parcel and delete it, that sliver parcel, and delete it, and then do your align features to clean up that area. What's really nice about ArcGIS Pro and the Parcel Fabric is the cleanups are a lot easier than they used to be inside of ArcMap. So good question. Yeah, I'm glad you did that. I'm glad you experimented. The lesson there is always make sure you do the alignment, make sure it's where you want it to be. Yeah, good one. Thank you, Jesse. Christy, I also see you have your hands up.
Yeah, I think Tammy beat me though, so I don't know if I should let her go first.
Go ahead. You let Tammy go. Let Tammy go. Tammy, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Christy. Appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. This is Tammy. I also have a question.
Good.
You know how we can assign a selection to the record?
Yes.
I'm wondering how you would do the opposite of that, how we would release the attachment to a record.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. So the way in which you remove the reference to the record, by the way, I'm just noticing I don't have my heads up display here. I don't know why. I may have to reload this on here. Is on the heads up display. Let me get in here again. I'll get over there. I'm sorry. Sorry. It's actually not, again, much easier cleanup than it used to be before. There we go. There we go. Okay. So let me start editing, and let's assume that in fact I have a line here, and this line has a relationship to a record on here. All right. Remember, well, in this case it doesn't. Let's go here and let's look at here. Okay, and here we do have a created by record. Literally, the only thing you need to do in order to go and remove a feature from its relationship to that record is go and select that feature and clean out that.
Yeah, and I thought about doing just that. And then I went ahead, but you know how many features can have lines and points and all of those pieces that you would want to remove. So how would you do that more quickly instead of one at a time? Do you know what I mean?
Interesting. So many types of, so let me go in and undo that. Let me go in and take this selected feature. Let's explore a little bit more about managing things. So let me go and find the record for this one selection here and make that my current record. All right. So I now have my current record here. And if I say, go and find all the features that are associated with this one record, it will now go and show me all the tax lots that are associated with it.
Uh-huh.
All right. And
So-
I should have had lines associated with it, but I don't have lines associated with it. But so if I want to go and change them all, I can go and do it on the layer level, in which I have them selected, and I go to the layer, and then I go down to my, again, I apologize for being a little bit slow today. Created by record. Created by record, wipe the created by record out. The created by record removes the reference over to removes the relationship between the features and the record itself. So have whatever you have selected. You can't do everything at one time, but you can at least do everything associated with the same layer at one time.
Got it.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in with a question, follow up on that?
Please.
What you were doing, Frank, and I appreciate it, was the selection window and how you isolated, you did that right click and say select all features associated with this record. I swear on the first day, and I was quite interested at the time, you had a version of that actually had lines, it had multiple feature classes and the features within it. Is it just because this data set doesn't have it, or because I tried to replicate that using this data set to get both tax lot lines and tax lots, etc. because I find it really informative to be able to capture all features associated with the record across multiple feature classes.
Right, right. So I'm going to go and pull up a sample data set that I use often. And again, it doesn't matter which of these I use. So why am I fumfering?
But as you're doing this, it's what you're saying is that it should happen. It's just this data set, right?
It's the data set. Yes, it's a data set
Okay.
more than anything else. And again, it's going to recognize that what I'm talking about, what I train on right now is the parcel fabric, not necessarily the cartographic model that you've been using or anything else that ORMAP has done. This is the standard parcel fabric and how it's supposed to operate. So if I go in here and let me go and turn on my selection, let's select something. I can go and go to my manage and say, find a record here, select that and say, select all features in here. And I should have points and lines
Yes.
and
Yeah,
parcels
that's-
in here. Yeah.
See, I think that's a real useful thing for cartographers to
Yeah.
sort of always wanting to know what all have I done so far in this, you know, if you want to think of a record as a project, right? A
Right.
main. That's okay, good. I'm glad to get the confirmation. And it was just the data set we've been working from.
Yeah.
And does that mean lines in this data set don't have the proper record in created by
yeah.
record field or something?
That's something that I didn't do a lot of testing on. I barely looked at it. I just assumed, okay, that's a parcel fabric one and working. So if we go in here, look at this. This is the field.
Okay, there it is. Perfect.
You know?
Mhm.
And
Awesome.
there are some in here, but if you look, there's not very many of them in here. And this is probably the data that I did. So yeah.
Hey Frank, since you have
Yes.
that table open, was one of Tammy's questions that she could do field calc in that table? I mean, if you had a massive amount you wanted to change, you do field calc in a table to change the create record.
Actually, you can, which is an interesting technique that those of us that do migrations do this a lot, because there's two fields in here which are important. One is a created by record, meaning these are the current records, excuse me, these are the current features and they're not marked historic. And the value that's being stored in here is the global ID of the record that you're using. Okay. It sometimes is easier just to go and create a record and then say, select these features and then go and say, let the software go and add them to the record and it will automatically populate that. However, there's a technique in which not necessarily the current, created by records, but the retired by records. These have to have a value in them. But interestingly, that value doesn't have to be a real record. It just has to be a GUID. Christy is smiling at that. Look at that little trick. Yes. It has to be a GUID value, a realistic GUID value. But if you go and do a lot of migrations, you realize that you can use all nines correctly referenced in there, and it's a valid value. And you can mark something as historic. It just doesn't have a record reference to it when it was marked historic. So when we're sometimes bringing in historic parcels for a client and they say we don't have records for it and we don't want to build them right, but we do want to keep them in our database and mark them as they're historic. And eventually we're going to get around and build the actual records for them. We'll go and put a pseudo global ID in here, and we'll just use a calc field to do that, to go and do that. Really good question. I like that. Yeah. Plus it showed you sort of how the sausage is made sometimes. Okay. All right. Good questions. Christy, come on.
Okay, first, quick one that came up off of Tammy's. You were talking about, that you can delete records. If you delete records and you still have features tied to that record, does it delete the features or does it just delete the created by from the features?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. It's almost always people ask it the other way around. And the reason why I say here's the thing. Let's go and create a new record and explore this a little bit more. Remember, I like Socratic learning. Okay, so we go in here, we create a new parcel. Again, you can create a parcel from lines or from polygons and say, let's go ahead and build this active record. We've now got that. Let's go and say, okay, let's select everything associated with that record. It will give us the points, the lines, and the polygon associated with. Okay, we've got a real valid record in here. Usually people will ask, well, if I go in here and I do let me go and make this so that you can see it a little bit better. And I do a delete parcel. What the delete parcel really does is it goes through here and takes my selected parcel, my selected polygon, my selected lines, and my selected points and deletes them, but it does not delete the record. Okay? And the reason being, the justification behind that is that a record can reference more than just that one selected parcel that you have, right? So what happens the other way around? When you delete a record, okay, does that delete the related parcels? And the answer, I believe, is no. I've never really attempted to go through there and look at that, but let's actually open it up. If I go in here and open up this records table, all right, and I should actually have, where is my records?
Gotta say select.
Yeah, I think you need to select your active record.
I thought I did have it. It's like features in here.
Up one.
Activate record of selected features.
No.
Select record. You're right. There you go. I just learned something. So on here, if I go in here, now when I select that record, all right, when I delete that record, all right, that record, I now have 54 records. I still have my lines in there. I still have everything. It didn't impact the ones that were related to it. Matter of fact, it also orphaned them because now they still have the old global ID of that record that no longer exists and that cannot be recreated. All right, so yes, you want to watch that relationship that is tenuous. All right, good question. Boy, I like this class. I like it.
My other kind of questions came up. One, I did figure out this morning quickly. We don't have multi-ownership on condos yet in our county, thankfully, but I know it's coming. So I played with the vertical duplicate, very cool. And at first I couldn't get the sequential numbering to work for me with it, but it did end up working. So that was exciting for filling out things like floors and tax lots on it. But then my other thing I ran into, and granted, I wasn't using the tool as you normally would. I was trying to understand things better. So I was doing the align parcels and I just hand drew something way off and then tried to connect things that would be a huge transformation. And I found my sketch did not exactly do what the tool did, but the tool did end up doing what I expected it to. So I don't know if it's just because I had it such an extreme case or if there was something else to it.
I don't know exactly what might have happened there.
I took screenshots, but again, I was doing something. you wouldn't do it in normal business practice because you wouldn't shift your map to a hand-drawn thing that's, 30 feet off.
So you're using 2.9, correct?
Using what?
ArcGIS Pro 2.9.
Correct.
Okay. In 3.0, there is a standard function, not specialized at all, in that if you move your display area where you're editing outside of where your current record is, it will automatically warn you that you're creating features that are outside the area of your record. Do you want to expand and create a multi-part record, or do you want to create, or have you forgotten to change your record on here? That's actually built in. That doesn't sound like what you actually were doing, but it is something that is built in here in the future for the next release of software. I'm again not sure exactly what could have been done, and what maybe we'll have to go over it during a break or something. So let's just at least talk about what you did do, which was you create a parcel, and then you sorry, I went in and I'm going to go and do a duplicate vertical, and I'm going to tell it how many times to do it. Let me undo this. Let's do this one, and I can tell it how many times to do it. And the actual vertical offset, by the way, it does have to have a vertical offset, I believe. And then you went and did that. And now if I go in here and say select what's associated with my record, I will see that in fact I do have same parcel, same 4 lines, but now I have 8 polygons, correct? And then you also use the sequential numbering, which is a fantastic tool. And this is my tax lines, my tax lots on here in the name field. And you can use the formatting. I don't think did I actually review this in class yet? I don't think I have. This is, yeah, okay. This is basically the snake pin tool, but it allows you to go and not just add numbers, but you can actually go and put formatting in here. You can put prefixes in here, and the components that are filled in are the pound signs. So you can put, again, you can put all sorts of prefixes, suffixes in here. You tell it what the starting value is. You tell it what the increment value is on here. And then as you draw through the line, it will go and give you that. By the way, I did this on top of something else. I should have clipped it beforehand. But now when I go in here, you'll see that I actually have sequenced. There's the 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down, and it has the prefixes and the suffixes on here. So I basically have stacked polygons on here. It's the beginning of what I hope is Esri exploring this ability to put stacked condominiums a little bit more, stacked units. I would like a little bit more control over what gets populated and where it gets populated, those sorts of things. But it's more than we've had previously. So it is, I like it a lot. And I think it's, we'll have to look later, Christy, and see what actually you might have done. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Brian, I think you're next, right?
Sure. So I have a question related from last week, and it was something you had mentioned, and I was hoping we could go into it a little deeper, but maybe it's outside the realm of the class. But you had mentioned last week the simplified by straight lines and circular arcs, the Slacker tool, which is Esri's favorite new tool from what I've seen. And I've used it on some of our converted data to varying degrees of success. But what you mentioned, I had a note last week that you said there were other tools you felt were better options than that. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on which tools would work better than that. I have a lot of densified curves to clean up in
One
or
of-
after my conversion.
One of my favorite tools here. So let's go here and let's see in this other data set. And let's see if we can find some densified curves. Sorry, I usually have something set up an area that we can look at and come on. I just want a densified curve.
I simplify my curves before the conversion.
And that often will work. Let's assume that this is a densified curve. All right. There is a different technique, one that we use. The simplify tool is a batch component on here. Now, yes, you can select them and it will only go and work against those selected ones, but it also there's not a lot of granular control over it. So that instead of utilizing that control, what we tend to do is we tend to use a workflow which is specifically associated with that. And I'm going to go, and this is not a record-driven workflow. This is a quality-driven workflow. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the align features tool. All right. The align features tool. I'm going to use some really rough values here. 10, I'm going to go and take and use the endpoint curve. And I'm going to say this curve goes from here to here, and it's supposed to go to here. All right. And by the way, I want to be careful with this edge, but here to here and goes to here. So it will go and take those. And if you noted, it actually created a curve out of that. All right. It is because I have checked here, allow features without a selection. Anything that is turned on will get, in fact, modified as far as the geometry on it. So you have modified the geometry to all match that new curve that you just drew. And by the way, you can define that curve as far as the radius on here using the endpoint arc. And then once I'm done with that, I can go in here and take these lines, which no longer reflect the radius, and I can just select those lines, just select the polygons, just select those lines, and then delete them. And then utilize the build extent and let it go through and look for every single record in my current extent and find any missing lines on there. I can then go in and select those lines and do an update COGO and tell it to go ahead and update the COGO on that line. And in fact, it has updated the COGO on that one single line. And if I actually go in and label that now, there you go. I will see that what was previously a densified curve that had a whole series of small lines has now been replaced by a single one. Now, in discussing this with Esri's Parcel Fabric team and the dev team, they were like, but it's so much faster with Simplify. I said, yes, but it gives worse results because it's a batch routine. And it's better, again, and recognize that when I say better, I'm talking about maybe you only have a couple hundred to do. If you have thousands, maybe you do run it through the batch, but use it with very coarse, or excuse me, use that simplified lines and curves. Use a rough setting so that it's not going to do too much damage to it. And then go in and look and actually pay attention and fix the individual curves on those. Did I come across correctly there, Brian?
I think so. The two issues I'm having is I have a couple of, in the tax lot lines and polygons, I have a couple pieces of geometry that are just tripping up the Slacker tool. It's giving me just some crazy loopy results. So I'm having to go in then manually and try to fix and correct those. And then the other one is I've got some line layers outside the parcel fabric. I'm trying to do some cleanup on some reference lines that are also densified curves.
Nothing that I did there required the parcel fabric other
Okay.
than, because I had some components in the parcel fabric, I told it to build those components for the missing lines. But if I
Right.
had existing lines there, I do that regularly on just simple feature classes. I'll use the align features tool to realign the polygons. And then if I have missing lines, I'll just go and create those missing lines from that. Yeah, I use that not just in the parcel fabric, but also outside the parcel fabric. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You can use that same technique. It's a little bit slower, but from our standpoint, I prefer quality rather than quantity. I can tell you, I did use that Slacker tool early on in the conversions, and I found that it was going and doing things that I didn't want it to do. So yeah, that was one reason why we don't use that very often anymore. Yep.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Who's next? Who wants to go and do next?
Well, since we're talking about curve stuff, I'll jump in here a little bit. So, and maybe Ben has some more insight on this, but when we did our conversion from ArcMap and we were going into 2.6, I believe Ben ran the Slacker tool on all of our vertex curves, and we got a bunch of, not only would it divide a curve, right? So sometimes it would see a vertex as an endpoint and then create that as an endpoint, but then they were unconnected.
Yeah.
And so it was breaking our geometry in some spots like that. So that was terrible. The other thing about curves is we found that the divide tool, if you were COGOing something and you had a long arc with multiple parts in it where other lines were coming in, but as doing good COGO, you would draw the entire thing and then split it up afterwards to reduce error. We would find that the divide tool would do the same thing. It would disconnect those endpoints. So now when we COGO, we draw each segment of a continuous curve in order to preserve its connected geometry.
Ted, thank you so much. Yes. Yeah, this is one of those things that often I get questions from clients about, and I want to explain what's actually happening there. So let's do a really deep dive into this and talk about how ArcGIS, how Esri's products all actually represent what they're actually drawing for you. All right. So at the very micro level, you have to use a macro lens just to see this. You have a resolution in here, and that resolution goes and it's going to tell you that there are a grid, and that's the closest that it can go and represent something on the grid. All right. And that grid is set when you first establish your feature data set, or when you first establish your spatial reference on here. And so what happens is, all right, as I'm going and inputting a line, and I draw the line in here, and what that line will do is I draw the line in here. When I finish drawing that sketch for that line, these points, these endpoints will actually snap to the closest grid point in there. They will snap to those points, and it will be represented to the point where you really can't see the difference on here. However, when I have a long curve, or I have a divide function that's going to go and divide this line, it's going to divide it here, it's going to divide it here. What's going to happen to those endpoints? They're not going to stay where they were. They're actually going to go and move, and that line is now going to be actually located here. Then it's going to be located here. Then it's going to be located here. It snaps them to the closest grid within the resolution of your spatial reference. All right, so it's not like it's leaving it sit out here between these grid points. No, it actually makes sure that it stores on the end of the feature. Once it's split up, once it's divided, it has to go and reside on one of those grid points in there. All right. And you can see, again, that's what happens. If you have a long thing and you split it up, it goes and actually moves it so it no longer is represented in that space between these points. It's rather represented to the closest grid point that it can snap to. We ran into this early on, and it took a while to research and figure out exactly what's going on, but this is exactly it. And it's exacerbated by the parcel fabric because the parcel fabric says these endpoints have to close. You know, you have to have a closed polygon, and it's comparing how close is it to the grid point. So if it connects grids up, yeah, it's good. But if in fact you've got something that's snapped to a different grid point, maybe it was snapped to this point and this point, you wind up with a gap between your lines. So the divides, the splits, they are all suspect to this, where you're actually going and slightly changing, you know, and again, this is one of the limitations of the way Esri goes and represents this. But that's the reality of how it represents this at this very, very micro level. That's what you'll be experiencing. Did that help? Yeah.
Yeah, that was because I think we were gonna like present that as a bug to Esri, but I guess it's
It's
baked into
not. You go back to Arc View and it does the same thing. You go back to Arc Info and it does the same thing. It's at the very deepest level of the way Esri stores these features in here. And Esri's never seen a reason to go and change it. Their resolution is always their way to resolve it is change your resolution before you do this. And again, yeah. So it's not a bug. It's the way the software is supposed to work. Just be aware that those things that take something long and divide them up, you might want to check them again. And you just have to go into that and in order to fix it, you either snap it together or you extend and trim and you do something to go and connect those points up again on there. Yeah. Thank you, Ted. Yeah. All right. Who else? Donna, Viola, Dean. We got a couple people yet. Just one. Who wants to go next?
I'm learning, but learning causes questions as well in my world. So this is outside the box.
Okay.
Or it's what I run into. It's a simple thing. When you move a parcel, the representation is still showing in the back until you finalize it.
Yes.
I guess my question on that is Esri's decision, but why? Because I want to get it out of my way. I want to say when I'm rotating to a small area, I kind of want to move that out of my way or make it non-seeable, not visible. Does that am I explaining myself?
Yeah, it is something that I also find offensive sometimes when I'm doing some of this. Let's just go in and make sure my topology is turned on, and let's go to a move on here. Let's go to a move, and remember, move has a snap point on here. I can go to a different area. I can control click on that, and that will be my new snap point on here. And then when I move something, again, with topology, it shows me what connections there are to my moves and what's going to move on here. But yeah, until you actually do this, it doesn't do anything. And there is no way to go and move this. That overall historic image, it still wants to show you where it was before and where it's going to be now. It is it is slightly different in Pro than it was in ArcMap. Yeah, I wish I could tell you there's a better way of doing it, but unfortunately, that's just, that's just the way.
That's
as
how it
you-
is.
That's, yeah, unfortunately.
Okay, so it's not just, I'm seeing it, but it's just everybody, you see it as well. Okay, thank you, Frank. That was the question.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry.
No, I like the confirmation though.
Yeah. Yeah. So Donna, I also went and I apologize for last week. If I don't know, I don't think you were on yet. I apologize for talking about annotation, bad mouthing annotation.
I think that, Frank, that's one of those, annotation is a great discussion on both sides, and everybody sees it differently depending on whether you're GIS, cartography, or
yeah.
an appraiser. An appraiser shuts, I mean, everybody has their different, but thank you.
Yeah.
I'm very enjoying everything here.
Okay. Hopefully no offense was taken. All right.
And to you too, Frank. I'm same too. I apologize if there's any.
So Donna, just to remind you, I'm not just a GIS person. I'm a registered professional land surveyor. And if you know land surveyors, we have very, very strong opinions, and we will defend our opinions. It doesn't matter. We don't take offense at it. So yes.
I like it. I appreciate it. Thank you, Frank.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Frank, it's not so much that we don't think our baby is ugly. We know it's
Yes.
ugly, but it's our baby.
Yes, well, that's it. So Donna, I also
Well
used,
said, Ted.
I used a reference to something that somebody had told me, that nobody likes to have their babies called ugly. And I know your babies aren't ugly. It's just, from my point, it's like, oh, look at that. It's not what I would do. But yeah. Again, I wasn't calling him ugly, but it hit me that expression hit me so hard that I still use it to this day. It's like, no, don't go and argue with clients about that, even though you're passionate about it. Don't do that. So, all right, let's do a little bit more. Then we're gonna stop here soon. Who else has learned something last week and wants to contribute and make sure that we add to the overall group think here?
I'll go ahead. So I'll just still go back to the thing I learned end of last class, which was the generate links by parcel, that little missing link to actually do the work. So that was good. Second thing actually wasn't like, so I'm the GIS coordinator here, and I know a lot of different little things about GIS, but I'm like listening to people earlier today here on this call talk about a Slacker tool. I was like, what is this Slacker tool we're talking about here? And I'm like looking up like, oh, simplify by lines and arc, or lines and circular arcs. Like, oh, and I'm like, that sounds cool. It's honestly a tool I'd never really heard of before, never one I had used. And I just thought that's actually, it was really quite cool to like continue to like learn stuff from other people around the field as well that I've been using it for a while, and I just like, oh, hey, that's really useful. So no, I appreciate just sort of like listening in and like, huh, what is that? And then finding out what that tool is. So I just thought that was interesting. Outside of the concept of parcel work.
Yes, I have to share it. And this is being completely honest. I am so impressed by how deep this group's knowledge is. It's amazing. And I love teaching people like this because I know that you're getting it. It's not, oh, here's how you do this. No, it's like, oh, here's how is this working? And so this gets me excited and fired up. So thank you. All right. Anybody else?
Yeah,
Okay.
I guess I'll go.
Okay.
Yeah, and let me just open up by saying all your babies are beautiful.
Yes, I agree. I agree. All of our babies are beautiful. Yes. Yes.
So yeah, no, I just have some quick ones. Yeah. So for me, it was just the keyboard shortcuts for the anchors. That was useful, and also the grounded grid corrections.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, the ground to grid corrections, definitely. And again, when you set them, you just want to watch and make sure whether when you're implementing a COGO tool of any sort, and again, the COGO tools are the Traverse tool, the circular curve, the spiral curve, the direction and distance, constraints, any of those tools, it will pop up. Because if it's going to store COGO values on here, it's going to want to know whether or not there's a correction that needs to be applied on that, whether it's a direction offset or whether it's a scale factor offset on there. So yes, very good tool. Again, my opinion is you should always be using it, but I also understand why sometimes it may not be what you need to do. So, yeah. All right, so let's move on a little bit. And there's some slides here we want to cover. Right now we're about 58 of the 84. There's some tools that we've gone past a little bit, but this is sort of one of those things I wanted to make sure that we understood how some of these tools that appear very simple on the surface, they can actually be very, very complex, and they can do things beyond what you think they can do. Simple tool, a merge tool. All right. The merge tool goes and takes a couple things and makes them one. Okay. So let's go in here and do a merge on here. And as we always do, let's create a record on here. All right. We've got a record. Let's take two parcels on here. Take two parcels. Let's merge those two parcels in here. This is what's called record driven. So let's merge them and let's explore the merge tool. The merge tool has a couple different options here that don't appear to be overwhelming when you first start. Up at the very top of it, you have two different tabs. You have an existing feature and a new feature. What that really means is if you're going to go and do an existing feature on here, it's going to go and take your two parcels and delete them. It's not going to go and keep them. It's going to go and delete them. They will not create historic parcels. As she's finally starting to show people that yeah, if you do into existing features, it's not going to create something historic. However, if I do it into a new feature, that means that it's going to try to figure out how to handle those existing parcels that you have selected. Then the first thing is, well, what layer are we going to do this on? Right now we have tax lots. So with the copy lines 2, which I think I showed you last week, when I go to merge something onto an existing layer, if it's staying on the same layer, it's going to mark things historic. However, if I move it down to a different layer, it won't. It will only impact the new ones that are on here. So in this case, this is the tax lot layer. Here's the two features I have selected on here. And then I come down further and say, okay, here's the template. If I wish to go and merge these onto my condo layer, again, the two features won't be changed. They'll remain exactly as they are. They won't be impacted by new created by records or anything like that. They'll stay exactly as they are, but they'll be used to create something new on here. So in this case, I'm taking two tax lots and I'm creating a new condo. And again, doesn't matter what these things are called. These could be called lots and a subdivision polygon. All right. This is actually one of the techniques to go in when you're building a subdivision, especially when you're building a subdivision from CAD files. You bring all the CAD lines in, you create lots, select the lots, and you merge them together into a subdivision polygon, all with the same record. So it's the same sort of thing. I'm going to go and use this and create a condo polygon. Note when I do that, it goes and lesses out all my attributions other than my defaults, and I can go and put this whatever I want in here. Test condo. All right. And it will go and do that. And I now will have a new record. My new record is the test condo. It has its own created by record on here. So that's one of the things you can do. You can take parcels that are in one parcel type and merge them to create new ones on a different parcel type. All right. I can also go and take these two, merge them together onto the same, and not use a template in which I tell it which one to go and take the values out of. And again, I can put a value in my name and it will go and use the attributes of the ones that I have selected on here. Then it goes and takes those existing parcel components, because I did it onto the same layer, same parcel type. It marked them historic that are no longer needed. So I now have historic polygons, this one and this one, and I have historic lines in there also. All right, if I had lines associated with that. So it's the merge tool actually does a lot of things beyond just, oh, you merge them together. No. Do you want to create historic? Do you not want to create historic? Do you want to put it onto another layer? Do you want to keep your original ones? Do you not want to keep your original ones? There's lots of options built into what seems to be a really simple tool. There's a lot of options, a lot of complexities in here. All right. All I really wanted to go and talk about the merge tool. When you get a chance, explore this. This is a really powerful tool on here. Split by meets and bounds description. We actually did this last week, in which we went and we took a meets and bounds description and we created the record. Then we input the boundary using the traverse tool, made sure the boundary closed. We created seeds. We built the parcel. We then did an align parcels, did a clip, and attributed the new one. This is sort of the one technique that Esri likes to demonstrate a lot, because it shows a lot of the power of what the parcel fabric does. Takes lines, confirms you've got closed polygon areas, builds the polygon, builds the seeds, allows you to go and line them up and clip them. Great, great demonstration tool is this option on here. However, there's also one that's more often comes into use more often, and this is option number 2, where you're splitting something by a meets and bounds description. And in this one, we're going to go and create the record. We're going to create, select the parcels, and notice we selected existing parcels, and then we're going to do a copy lines 2. Then we're going to input the dividing lines between those two parcels, and we're going to create the seeds, and we're going to build them and attribute them. So let's demonstrate that. All right, let's undo this whole thing here. Here we go. All right, my new record on here. I'm going to go and select parcels. And let's say I have a new boundary line agreement between these two lines in here. I selected, created a record, selected my parcels, and I said the next thing was to do a copy lines 2. Again, copy lines 2, I think we went over last week. If we're going to go and copy the lines to the exact same parcel layer, it's going to mark things historic. If we copy them to a different layer, it does not mark them historic. Okay. And then show only active record goes and only shows you the features that are part of the existing record, and then whether or not you want to preserve the attributes. Preserve attributes only really preserves the attributes because it's still going to go and create seeds for you. So let's just leave it at this with everything checked. All right. And let's go through a workflow here. So it has gone, it's only showing me those values that are on my current record. All right, there's that one value again. And if I go and clear this, here's what I have. All right, so let's say that these lines are no longer valid. They're being replaced by new lines. And this new line, what happened was they went and moved, and I forget what this value is here. Yeah, they move this parcel, this line over 50 feet. They move this one down 50 feet to create this new line between them. So I can do a couple things. I can go in here and I can take this line and divide it by divide. And again, I can divide that by a distance from the start of the line here. And I want to move it 50 feet over. And it's going to move it 50 feet and show me where that new divide is going to be. I can divide it up. If I have COGO values on there, it will automatically calculate those COGO values on here. Same thing here, but this time I'm going to do it from the end of the line. So it's up here, it's going to divide it 50 feet here. All right. So you can see here's the new point here. Here's the new point here. If I'm really meticulous about it, and some would say obsessive about it, which I am, I will go in here and I will take these two and reflect what the new value is. I'll merge them together. All right, I'll merge them together and I will not keep that. I'll just say merge them together and I'll merge this together here and I'll merge it together and I'll go ahead and do that. And then I'll go ahead and calc these values. Update the COGO on these two values here. All right, so I have new updated COGO on there. And let's clear that out. Let's get off of update COGO. So now I'll have new COGO values in here. Now let's go and create this new dividing line. And I'll go and I'll create. And I'm going to go to tax parcel line and I can do a traverse if I want, or I can just draw the lines in. Since I want to use this as a learning opportunity, I'm going to use a traverse tool. All right, I'm going to use a traverse tool, and this is going to be for tax parcel lines. I'm going to go and set this here, and I'm going to go 80 degrees northeast for 500 feet. Actually, I probably need to go more like 650 feet. Yeah, it's better. Okay. And then I'm going to go north, maybe 10 degrees northeast for 600 feet. All right. But that's supposed to close over to that point there. And again, I'm exaggerating this because I want to demonstrate what you should be doing if you use this technique. So that's where I should be closing instead of here. This is commonly called an open-ended traverse, where I start at one point and I end somewhere else, versus a closed traverse where I close back on the point that I started on. So if I have an open-ended traverse, I will go and set my closing point to be there. All right, and then go to my closure and say, go ahead and adjust this out, and it will adjust it back. If you are using this copy lines 2, and you're going to use an open-ended traverse, always make sure you set that closing point and make sure you adjust it, because if you get into that very, very micro level, it will not close and it will not create seeds for you. So just be aware of that. All right, I'm getting off of the traverse tool. So I now have new boundary line between these two, and I still have seeds. If I delete these seeds and tell it to recreate seeds, it'll just recreate them. But the seeds help me to ensure that I have closed areas on here. Before I start, or before I stop and tell it to go ahead and build this out, I went through that really quickly. Are there questions about this, what I just did?
I have a question, Frank. It's Donna.
Yes.
So if we had grid to ground applied to the lines, when you do update COGO, does it take that into effect? Is there any, when you it applies it, or?
Yeah, it does. It does. It adjusts those COGO values on there. Yeah. Matter of fact, well, again, this is 2.9. At 3.0, there is an update COGO geoprocessing tool that actually allows you to apply apply ground to grid on your overall geoprocess features. It's pretty amazing what it's doing there. Okay, good. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
It's actually kind of a combination of question for you and for Tammy. Tammy, can you explain what our policy is on rendering historic lines? I know, like, when I saw the work that you were doing there, Frank, that it looked like it reminded me of, oh yeah, so I think we keep like a dashed line or something for historic, but Tammy will clarify it. And then my question is, how can we serve that workflow, that requirement through the use of the historic subtypes
Good.
that are being kept?
Good question. Good question.
Tammy, are you there?
Yeah, this is Tammy speaking. Tom is right. So we do keep the historical lines. That's correct. And I guess we copy them in to that layer, I believe.
Yeah, we have a historic line
Do it that way.
layer.
Okay. All right. So again, remember, I am parcel fabric guy. I am not ORMAP guy. I'm parcel fabric guy. So please forgive me if I go and offend anybody. So inside the parcel fabric, there is in fact the ability to have historic lines and historic polygons on here. All right. So if I wish to go and have my lines displayed a certain way, and I can go in here and set the symbology for my historic lines, and all historic lines will be displayed accordingly. I can tell you that on here, let's go here, come on. On here, if I go to properties and I go here, by the way, I had a great professor in college when I was taking some, I believe I took cartography classes when I was taking cartography classes, and he said GIS is one of the greatest inventions in the history of humanity because it allows you to create really ugly maps really quickly. So yeah, yeah, I'm going to create a really ugly scenario of how you go in and then display your historic maps. I'll just make them purple dashes on there. All right. And I'll apply those in here. So when I build this, it's going to then restore everything else, including if I turn it on, it will show me what my historic lines are going to look like. So let's go ahead and build this on here. And in fact, I have to be careful because my historic lines, we actually have scale dependency on here. So let me go and I'm 5,000 here. When I made that change in the symbology, I didn't make it in the right place. Really ugly. And here. All right. So I can change the symbology of where it appears on here. And how it's represented on here. I don't need to copy it somewhere else. The parcel fabric is going to track and determine what my functions and processes are marking as historic or no longer needed and what it's not. One of the really nice things is that when you do a merge, it determines, is this line longer, is it needed any longer, or in fact, is it now something no longer needed as part of this representation, and it will automatically mark it as historic. Again, store the global ID of the record in the retired by record field is how it actually does that. All right. Did that help you, Tom?
So in the design, Frank, and Tom, what we have.
Yeah, there it is. It's a historical boundary inside a reference.
in reference lines are historical lines. And a reference line, historical line, is a line that appears on the map, as Donna has told me in the past, and I probably have it wrong. It's a historical property line that is helping the cartographer with placement of or management of a new property record. And so the concept is after you'd gotten done with the merge, you could have selected the historic tax lot line that was there, done a copy special, and then pasted that into the reference line historic line. So not all historic tax lot lines are reference historic lines, but all reference historic lines should be historic tax lot lines moving forward, in that the historic line that comes as a result of a transaction, if it's important enough, or if it's going to help the cartographer in the future and still keep the map from getting truly ugly, then it would be copied into the reference line. And that way it would be used on the published map. And that's why in the design for ORMAP, we kept historic line in the reference feature class.
Yeah.
So that's just history on it.
And again, you recognize I'm coming from the outside. I'm a parcel fabric guy. I'm not ORMAP guy. And I have not been privileged to any of the discussions or the design on ORMAP. And I think in looking at it, it's a really good design. But I'm just parcel fabric guy. That's all I am. So.
Yeah. And,
right.
and I really, you know, I think, Frank, this is a really important thing. So some cartographers, as we've discussed in the last year, that said, well, there's just so much overhead in the fabric. Why don't I just go to Pro? And this is just a great reason to go to Pro. So now you have all the historic records. It's all there. What you decide based on the map today may not be what you decide on the map in the future, so that when a new cartographer comes in and looks at your map and says, well, what really happened on the transactions here, they can then go look at the historic tax lots, the historic tax lot lines, and really understand what and why the cartographer made that cartographic decision to display 1, 2, or 3, or all of the historic tax lot lines. So just because you can't display every historic tax lot line on a map, but now we have them all. We can go back and get them. And if you add this with the versioning, you've even got more. So again, by adding that in, it really enriches what is behind what is in the reference line, historic line feature class as a line type.
Really good points.
Can I ask Tammy what I see? My memory is that there was like one generation back of historic lines that were typically kept. And the second question for Tammy is, do you think that's in the handbook? Like that's part of I seem to recall you pulling up some part of the mapping cadastral handbook saying historic, like that governed the use of historic lines.
I'm not entirely sure. Tammy is saying, I can't think of anything right now.
I'm searching through it right now. It's saying former boundary lines other than or the original lot lines only need to be shown if they are referenced on deeds or surveys. So it seems like there is a reference to them in the handbook, like they're not just a convenience thing, I think, for the cartographer.
Well, my understanding is, you know, and from a practical standpoint, is they're left there because you'll get a legal description down the road that calls to one of those historic lines. So you want to be able to see where they are. And I know the manual says something about only if they're called in other deeds. Well, I don't know. I'm not going to research every deed around it to see if any of them call to this line. So I leave as many as I practically can in historic. Yeah, we have maps where we end up with so many historic lines in them, then they start to become more cumbersome than they are beneficial.
And that's when
then you'll start selecting and cleaning some of them out. I like this idea that you can leave them all in there because they're in there as part of the historic record. My thought is we could also possibly, I don't know if it's in there, I don't have the model pulled up in front of me, a display, yes, no field. So maybe they're all in there and we only display, then they're still in there and we can decide which ones we
So-
display.
So they are going to still be in there in the historic record. So the historic tax lot line is going to be there. Whether you display them or not is whether you put them into the reference line. So the reference line feature class has that historic line type. So if you're going to display them, put them there. If you're not going to display them, just leave them in the historic tax lot line, because then you've got everything. And then when you're really researching out an area and you go, well, that line's not there because, you know, you can't have them all. You then can go to the parcel record and the historic lines that are associated with the tax lots and grab it. And then if you want to then change what is in the reference lines for the public or the cartographer to see, because now you've got a new deed call or something, you can add it in and change it. So you've never lost the original information that helped you with the transaction. That's one of the most exciting parts of having the fabric for me, is now nothing is lost. And so there's this real separation, which we started in ArcMap, of saying, look, you've got the edit, the construction, the maintenance information, and then you've got the map we publish. So think about the map we publish as the reference lines, but the map we're maintaining is really the heart of it, is the parcel record and the tax lots and the tax lot lines that are associated with all the things that Frank's gone over. So the fabric is kind of the Frank stuff is the source. And what we do with it afterwards, and I guess that gets into annotation as well, what we do with it afterwards is how we make that into a cartographic product. And reference lines, and there's a number of other lines in the reference feature class. PLSS lines is another great one. You don't display all your PLSS lines. However, in the fabric, we should have them all because they are used as a construction methodologies. But how much of those PLSS lines really go into assist in the cartographic? And, you know, and this means that finally public land survey lines are actually going to be real and useful for construction. And then whether we display them or how we display them, then is in the reference lines associated with PLSS as an example. So just some different ways to look at it, which we, you know, obviously had some interesting discussions back in the design days.
Awesome. Thanks for that clarification.
And
Good
just
discussion. Good discussion.
just if I could add one more point to this. When I talk to people about the parcel fabric, I tell them that it actually is a different purpose than cartography. Because what happens is if you're going and doing this, it's not pure cartography, but rather what happens is the people who are interacting with the parcel fabric are really curators of digital land records. We are curating, we are managing and adding and modifying those digital land records. Where did these lines come from? It wasn't necessarily where the line is, but where did it come from? Why was it adjusted? You know, what impacts did it have when we put this into the map? It's really about building not just the history, but the overall amount of information about this parcel, about this lines, about these surveys, all of this. You're a curator of digital data now. Yeah.
I have some points to raise with historic lines. Dean made a good point about using it as the reference to display on the map, which we currently are doing that. Sorry. And that brings up a point where, you know, now we have duplication of effort. So now cartographers got to copy the line over to reference and make sure it's attributed as, you know, we call it old lot line. So, you know, so there's this extra step that you have to do. And that's a big, you know, it's a factor in our workflow, I think, is extra steps. I'm not sure to what point that slows down production, or it's just somebody's philosophy that they don't want to do things twice, but you know, that's a point. And as far as historic lines, you know, when we you know, our data right now has planarized lines, right? So when you make a tax lot historic, you got the polygon that's historic, but not all the lines are going to be historic because the adjacent lines belong to another tax lot, right? So, I mean, is that, I guess that's what I assume is going on with the lines. So if not all the lines are historic, you know, and we know adjacent lines maybe still be active, but it's sharing a boundary with the historic lot line. So how do we deal with that? Like, not all parcel can have all its lines.
So two really good points there. I like this discussion. So the first one, I'm going to give you my opinion. All right. And regarding whether or not going and continuing to maintain those reference lines is worth it. One of my philosophies is you always want to evaluate, is the juice worth the squeeze? The effort that's you have to put into it, what are you getting out of it? If you're not doing it now, you haven't been doing it in the past, well, you need to evaluate, is it something that I should be doing? You know, if you should be doing it, then yes, the juice is worth the squeeze. All right. One of the good things about the parcel fabric is it doesn't care. It's still going to do it for you. Whether you're going to use them or not, it's still going to put it there. Then the only question is whether you move it over to the reference layer for you to put into your maps. But it's let the software work for you. All right. Okay. Secondly, and maybe we need to clear our minds a little bit because I am going to go in a little bit deeper here. So the parcel fabric actually has two different ways of dealing with lines, and they all relate to the record. So if I go in here and let's create a new record just to deal with this, all right, we've got a new record here. If I go and create a new parcel, and again, you're going to see me doing this same thing where I create a polygon. All right, and then I tell it to go and build that polygon. If I'd go in there and say, okay, now let's select the features that are in here, and I'm going to show you 4 points, 4 lines, 4 tax lots. Okay. You can go and depending upon how you use your records, you can have it so that every single parcel that you build has its own set of lines. So that if I go in and create a new record and build another one next to it, it will not reuse that line. It will only use the lines that are part of the record to do evaluations, and it will create new lines for you. So again, that's called an overlapping line model. However, I can also go in there and say, well, let's create another record. And this time, let's create this new record here. And this time, let's go and create a polygon. And let's create another polygon here. And sorry. Let's create another polygon here. I'm using the autocomplete here. All right. Oh, why aren't you doing this? Autocomplete polygon. Finish. Interesting. Why won't it let me do autocomplete? Well, I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to go and create lines. I want to create lines. Create lines, sorry. I get a little bit too excited sometimes here. And I'm going to create another set of lines. I'm going to create seeds. Oh, notice I don't have here and here. I don't have lines there for me to create seeds. Create seeds. I have my seeds. I built this down. All right. The question is, how many lines do I have here? All right. I've got these all in here. Let's go and do a select. How many lines do I have there? I have one line. How many lines do I have here? I have one line on here. So depending upon how I use my record, because remember, the lines are associated with the record. So if I'm building what we as surveyors call simultaneous conveyances, these are things that are all built at the same time, I'm going to use what's called the shared line model. So it only has one line between them because there was one line defining what defines the separation between these two parcels. Think of the PLSS. That's a sequential conveyance. So that would use, if you're building it from scratch, that would use a shared line model. However, if I'm doing tax lots, which are individual, what we as surveyors call sequential conveyances, gets done here and then move over. There's another one at another point of time over here that's next to it. They each have their own set of lines. They are overlapping line models that are used in here. So the fabric is sophisticated enough to know how you built this. And it all comes back to, how do you use that record? Does each individual parcel have its own record, or do you have one record which covers a series of things in here? That defines whether you're using the overlapping line model, or whether you're using the shared line model on here. It handles both of them. So you cannot assume, well, I'm going to have shared lines. It doesn't mean that. It just means that you can have either one. You just want to be aware that as you're building them, you're defining how the lines are built. Okay, so you're concerned about, well, it's the lines really don't exist. They may exist. They may exist. You may have two different values on here. Those two lines that are laying on top of one another, they may have different distance values in them because of different surveys, different legal descriptions. There could be lots of differences in there. So you can't just assume that you're only going to have one line separating two parcels in there. That's not the way it works in the parcel fabric. Okay, hopefully.
Tammy, I've got a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Related to that situation where you have overlapping lines, is that a problem for topology? What happened?
I'm here. Is anybody else here? I can still see webcams moving. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I thought things froze. It got quiet.
Sorry. Well, let's not wish that on us again. So let's talk about topology, though, Tom. So topology inside the parcel fabric, and again, I keep going back to parcel fabric instead of just the sort of the cartographic data model you might be working with. The topology of the parcel fabric is something different than what you think about as far as the traditional topology. The traditional topology says polygons can't overlap on top of one another, that lines can't be on top of one another. It deals with how things relate to one another. The parcel fabric topology actually deals with structural integrity of a feature, of a parcel. And on here, okay, we can see that these are the rules for each individual parcel type, that the lines have to have points on the ends of them, that the lines can't have dangles, can't self-overlap, can't self-intersect, and that
Nothing
the
about that.
lines have to be on the boundary of a polygon. And then finally, the polygon has to have lines on it. So it doesn't say lines can't be on top of one another within the parcel fabric. It
Wow,
says
interesting.
a parcel has to have its own set of lines. So when you think about what Christy was doing earlier, in which she was stacking condominiums, all right, she could have had lines on top of one another, or she could have just had a shared lines, depending upon how she built it. All right, so be careful when you talk about topology. It's interesting. It's one of these things I have to talk to every one of my clients about, because they say, well, I should be running topology. And the reality is, within the parcel fabric, you don't run topology, because all you have to do is a build, and build goes and builds everything that's missing. The only time you really run topology is if you want to clean up the things that snuck past. Maybe you have a line that isn't on the boundary of a polygon, then you want to clean that up with just deleting that out. So yeah, it's a very different type of topology that's built into the parcel fabric.
So
Yeah,
Frank,
I
I have I'm sorry, Tammy.
And I didn't realize that,
Yes.
that the rule about not having overlapping lines didn't apply in parcel fabric, but it makes sense. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, yeah. And again, it's a different mindset. They didn't just take ArcMap, non-parcel fabric stuff and bring it in. They said, okay, let's rethink this data model. I can share with you holistic testing. We spent a day on this. And it's like, what is this actually? How do we want to build that model? And what do we want to do with it? So Donna, you were going to say something.
So that's fabric. For Polk County, when we build that we're gonna do production maps on, and that we have single lines. We don't have lines on top of each other. I believe one of the topology checks is if there are duplicate lines on top of each other, that'll be caught at times. My question kind of goes back. So when I historic it, it's just a polygon for the most part. It's not taking my lines out, or is that a setting I have? Like when I have set, if I did set to historic, what I'm seeing is it's my polygons that are typically being historic, not the lines. Or
It depends upon it. What it's doing is actually looking to see whether or not those lines are related to the record that's associated with that polygon.
does it take it? So it will take it out of my
Yeah, if
build
I
if the lines
go
are
in here,
associated.
if I go in here and select this here, and I set that as historic, all right, the lines disappeared, the points disappeared.
So I could use copy lines 2 and then set that as historic if I didn't want to lose my lines for some reason.
Yeah, you could.
I mean, it's type thing. Okay, no, thank you. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. It's going to take whatever's related to it and move the whole. So
Yeah.
you really have to be careful, in other words, when you, because you could have a record related somewhere and you didn't realize it was related. That could be set historic too. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to be conscious of what the actions are. Yeah. Good. All right.
Just one last comment on that, Ben. And one of the problems was that the map file, the project file that went out as the sample data set did not have historic lines turned as a visible feature. So apologize about that. Again, it was that compromise between, are we doing this in Pro or are we doing 100% fabric? So I didn't add those in. I will in the next release. So I appreciate you going through this, Frank.
Yeah. And like I said, as long as everybody understands what I'm discussing is just purely the parcel fabric, ArcGIS parcel fabric, and how that works. And there's enough complexity built into that without throwing in, is it non-fabric or is it fabric, as far as how these things work on there.
But we are, on a positive note, this has never been available as a back historical layer for us in Polk. So we're hoping that we can keep our history, like you've said, as to the build of the assessment map over time and relate
Right.
it maybe with comments and that. So
Yeah.
something new.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you have to use only one method or one data model to go and do that. You may be able to go and find some sort of hybrid that works for you on both sides. Yeah. All right. So this is a really interesting technique. And I can tell you that a lot of times my team, this is what we use to go and split parcels up, is that there's existing geometry. It's sufficient. We'll sometimes go in and clean up. By clean up, I mean clean up the attributions on the existing one, clean up the values that are stored in there, those sorts of things to reflect what the survey or what the subdivision or what the deed actually says, the legal description. But this is a really interesting technique because what it does is it eliminates that need to go and do this. Boom. Right? It eliminates that need because that is probably the toughest thing to deal with, is making sure that something exactly lines up and overlays on top of the other, and it's not going to create a sliver or a gap or an overlap. That's very, very, you got to pay attention when you're doing that. Yeah. So that doing this option instead, if you could, it's one of the things that we recommend. By the way, those of you that, and I don't know how many of you are actually going to be using web services, this option goes back to the server less often, and it's actually faster than the other option. All right. This next tool is actually talking about splitting by an Aliquot description. All right. And this is a straight boundary in which you create a record, select the parcel split, but this is the parcel to split, select divide, and that'll be dividing polygons, and then input the divide distance or criteria, select the edge you're going to use as a reference, and then go and select divide and attribute the new thing. So let's go back here to your data. All right. So let's say that I have a description here. Let's create a new record. All right. Let's say my description says the north 100 of the west 400 of this parcel. All right. Aliquot, portion of. How do I do this? Create a record, select the parcel, click on divide. Now, when I select the parcel, that's a polygon that I've selected. I have not selected the lines. I have selected the polygon. And in ArcGIS Pro, the tools are smarter than they used to be in ArcMap. It knows what I have selected and it knows what it can do with it. In this case, when I have a polygon selected, it knows that I can go and divide it by proportionate area, by equal width. All right. So in this case, I'm going to go by width. And I forget what I said, north 100 maybe. 100, and then I tell it what edge am I going to use to reference there, and I'll use that, and that's my north 100 feet already, and I can say go ahead and divide that. Now I'm going to take that one and go and do a divide, and this is the one I'm going to want. Only choose this one. And I'm going to use the 400 feet I think I used. And this time I'm going to pick this line over here. And it's going to put my new split here on there. So that is the north 100 of the east, or the west 400 of this parcel. These lines are automatically calculated perpendicular to the reference lines that I do. And they are automatically, the measurement is exactly at perpendicular lines. It creates the lines, creates the points for me as part of that. I may want to go back in here and take these two and merge them back together. All right, and say I want to use the attributes of this one for that and merge them back together. So I now have the north 100 of the west 400 of that original parcel. Splitting by an Aliquot description in which they're using straight boundaries. Easy, right? Boy, wouldn't it be nice to be able to do that all the time? Yeah. It's a nice technique. However, what happens when you have a curved or irregular boundary inside of Pro? So again, you select the record, select the parcel to be split, input a split line using either the create lines or create parallel, and then you select and perform the split function, not the divide, the split function to go and do that. All right. So if I go in here and let's say it says new record, always a new record, the south 200 feet of this parcel. All right. So the first thing I'll do is I'll go and I'll create a line. So I will go and create, in this case, I will create a new tax line, but I'll create a tax line by using the trace tool. All right. And when I start the trace tool, I now have an option to trace parallel. If I hit O for offset, it says, wow, let's go and do a trace by offset. And this is going to be 200 feet on here. Okay, and now if you'll note, there is my offset. I'm now going to hit OK. There's my new line here that I just built. I can go and do a split on these lines, the split tool. And I can tell it that I may want to go and only split these. Yeah, let's do this and just split that line here. Split that line at that intersection. And I'll purposely be haphazard and say, okay, let's get off the split tool. Let's select that line, delete it. Select this line, delete it. Let's see how close I came. All right. So now that I've created the line, now I have to actually split the polygon underneath it. So I can split this here by selecting this and then doing the split function again. This time split. And I can tell it to split by tracing a line. All right. And in this case, split. And if I'm tracing, and splitting without a segment. Oh, sorry. I can split by feature. Here's my target feature, is this one. That's what I'm going to split. The feature that I'm going to use to split it is the line. Sorry. So here's the line that I'm going to use to split my polygon with. And here's my polygon that's going to be split. And I can go ahead and do that. And it goes and splits them out. That could have been a curve. That could have been an irregular line. But that's another workflow on how to go and split performing the aliquot split, in this case, the southerly 200 feet of that parcel, on that parcel, on there. Questions? Yes, Brian.
Could you do that same idea by area? And what I'm thinking is we get, you know, the north 5 acres of even width. And those are always fun ones to try to calculate.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Yes. So in fact, I would not use this technique. I would use the technique I used before where I split the polygon. Let's go all the way here. Come on. Okay. So I have a new record. I have that polygon. Okay. And I can do a divide. So again, I can do it by area. I can do it by proportional area. I can do it by area. On here, I can tell it 5 acres. It actually is, yeah, it's plenty. I can say the north 5 acres on here. 5 acres and tell it which line to go from. In this case, that line there, that's the north 5 acres. Now, again, the problem with this technique is it has to be a straight line. It cannot be this line. It can, however, be something like this. Maybe I want to do a line that goes from here to here. I can do that. I can go parallel, but I can't use the individual nuances in here to go and do that. All right. But yeah, thank you for asking that question. That's something I usually don't demonstrate a whole lot, but yes, you can do area in here, proportional area. Excuse me, equal area, where you define the area that you want split out. We as surveyors hate this, but I know that there's legal descriptions all over that that's how it's defining it. It's like, oh, you know, that southerly 5 acres, is that parallel with this line? Is it parallel to the north line? Is so many different variations on there.
And now we're dealing with 3 owners later trying to determine where the line is, and they want us to decide.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, there's a tool in here that will help you at least start towards that. And, you know, it's about, in many ways, it's about educating, you know, the general public about these things. It's so, yeah, thank you. That was a good question. All right. Curve line on here. All right. Is anybody ready for a break? You want a 10-minute break or something? I see Donna shaking her
I
head.
say that's a fantastic idea myself, about a 10-minute break.
Perfect. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break and we'll come back. The next thing I want to do is I want to talk about processing a subdivision, in which we go and take a subdivision, because there's actually, thank you who sent this, there's actually a thing here, which is sort of a subdivision. At least it's a partition plat. Down in the south here, we think of these as being subdivisions, in which we'll go in and we'll actually build this out. All right. So we'll just talk about how the process, and then we'll actually go and do this for the rest of this session. All right. Perfect. 10-minute break. I'll see you back here in 10 minutes. All right, so we are back. And before we move into this new component, let's find out, does anybody have any real questions or comments, or do you want any clarification on what we've gone over so far? Any comments even, you know, did you find it interesting or no? I turned off my webcam because I was asleep, you know, what anything. So Viola, the first couple of days you were very, very expressive, and I haven't heard anything today. What's going on? I don't hear anything. Are you okay? Shake your head at least. Yeah. Okay. All right. pick something up. We still have homework for tomorrow, so hopefully you've all learned something today. All right, so what we're going to do then is we're going to look at what happens when you process, or what sort of is the workflow that you'll go when you process a subdivision on here. And just sort of to roughly go over it at a very, very high level, sort of as programmers call it, a pseudocode. Yeah, what are we going to do? We're going to go in, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a subdivision. All right, we're going to create the overall boundary of this subdivision. And this kind of looks like inputting a meets and bounds description. We're going to create a record. We're going to input the subdivision. Now, we don't have subdivision in our current data model here. So, but let's cancel out of that on here. Let's divide that. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to use, it's okay if we should we use tax code or condo? Does it matter?
Your type is going to be tax lot.
So the tax lot is going to be the individual parcels, correct? Inside of here? Is that correct?
Correct, correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So maybe
So-
I should correct this. Do you not create an overall boundary of this overall plat?
We
Do you not-
do, and the subdivision boundary is actually a reference line in the reference feature class. And we have elected in the past, I don't know if it's correct or not, but there was so much variation from county to county way back in the mid to early 2000s when we were doing the initial design. We actually had a plat feature class, and then the design team elected not to bring that forward because no one was using it in ORMAP. So we did have a feature class for lots and for the actual boundary. In our particular case, how Polk County is using it, and Ben could probably jump in about how they're using it, is that we build that first initial subdivision boundary as a tax lot boundary. We then move that into the subdivision reference class, check to make sure our boundary is closed and everything else. And at that point, we get rid of the seed, if you will. Then you've got the lines and away you go. So that is one particular way that you could use this, is that you make the initial tax lot, you check the closer, you check everything else. You can then move those features into the reference line feature class as subdivision boundaries. And at that point, you then can make tax lots using the, you basically unmake the tax lot and go on from there. I
Okay.
don't know if that was clear.
That was. So I'm going to, again, I'm tax parcel guy or parcel fabric guy. So I'm going to ask that for this exercise, we extend our imagination a little bit. And so we're going to use the tax code parcel types as our subdivision, our plat boundary subdivision. And then we're going to use the condos as sort of our individual parcels or individual parcels here. And then we're going to assume that maybe they do follow the same boundary line as the lots, or maybe they don't, and we'll then make 3 tax lots in here. Are we okay with that?
So
Go ahead.
Frank, I don't know how much more work it would be for you, but if you could add a new parcel type, which is the subdivision and the lots. I know those are relatively easy to add in, and then use them. Condo is an administrative boundary, but I think that would give folks the idea that said, okay, maybe we want to have a subdivision parcel type, and maybe we want to have lots be and part of this. And again, going back to the old days when we did the initial design in 2.2 or 2.4, whatever, we ended up having some issues with having more feature types, more parcel types, and our recommendation was to keep that to a minimum. I know that's now changed in additionals. So I think this would help me understand is, do we want to add, and Ben, who's on the design team, that do we want to add the subdivision as a parcel type, and do we want to have lots as a parcel type so that they're there? And I think that would be more realistic for the group, because if I was a county and I was looking at this, that's what I'd want to do if I wanted to track that. So, and again, if there's anybody in the group that says Dean's crazy, it won't be the first time. So, but I think that would be relatively simple to make happen.
So, yeah, it's see, Dean's lucky he knows me well enough that knows that I work well being challenged. All right. So I've just added a new subdivision parcel type and a new lots parcel type. These are now, if I go and refresh my area here, I should. And that is my default. I have lots. Here's my subdivisions. All right. Now, okay. Everybody okay with what I just did?
And you have them in the default database, not in TownEd, or are they in TownEd?
No, actually, if you notice, I went and made TownEd my default geodatabase.
Perfect.
Okay.
And I apologize. I know this is somewhat out, but the other piece that I wanted folks to really see was that if we're missing something in the design, adding a new parcel type to the system was that simple. That, you know, other than Frank's good at what he does, so yay. So thank you, Frank. But adding that in, you can. There's nothing that says that the fabric you get with the initial design is what you need to do. You can add additional features, and those additional features can be part of the fabric, or they can just be additional feature classes. So again, I really thank you, Frank. Appreciate it.
Yep, not a problem. So also you'll notice that the ones that I did add, they come with default attribution on here. The one we really only care about is this name attribute. And it has the name on the subdivisions and also this lots one, because you have another lots polygon feature class in here somewhere outside there. There it is there. So we called it lots one, but that's all right. Notice that it's not here. It's not here in my table of contents. And I'm not going to go and try to reload and everything else here. Instead, because I'm using standard symbology, in order to go and load this, I'm going to go and simply say, add this to a new map document, which become map number 2. And here's my subdivisions. Here are my lots. Now let's sort of move these up a little bit here. So here it automatically loads them. It automatically sets the definition queries on here. It automatically sets sets a lot of defaults. I don't personally like a lot of them, but it does set a lot of defaults on here. If I go back here, I think that's where I was, somewhere in here. Again, I'm just going to go in here to my view and say, let's link up the views just in case I ever want to go back here and figure out. So I have linked it up to go and center and scale on the same things. All right. We good with that? I know people sometimes look at it and say, Frank, what kind of magic are you doing? And how do we learn how to do it? And it's like, it's really not that magical. All right. Just learn to use Pro on here. All right. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go and find this area here. And I know, Donnie, you can tell me exactly where that is because I'm going to use, by the way, let's take this one off. We don't need that.
It's 7425B, like in boy. And it's, if you do tax lot 2004, it'll get you to the area.
Sorry, I was trying to clean up
Oh,
here.
you're good.
Why does this fail to open?
It's going to fail because the tool is actually referencing map. I didn't know when I built the initial tool that you can say just active map. So I think it's the tool itself is just using the map.
Sorry.
So it's not going to run on a map too. Apologize.
That's okay. So if that's the case, can I go over here and use it then?
Well, unless I just lied, yeah.
Look at that. Look at that. I love it. Okay. All right. So sorry again, Donna, could you tell me?
7425B, like in boy.
7.4, is that dash 25B?
It might be 7.4.25B.
Yeah, you can do 7.4 and just, you can use the pull down to select the map.
Ah. I'm not used to having this all set up for us. That's 24.
B, like in boy, it's 25B.
Oh, 25B.
25B. And 2000 tax lot 2004 will get you to the vicinity.
Oh, look, it's already in there. Already in there. That's all right. That's all right. So now I'm going back over. Oh, sorry. Let's make sure I set this in automatically center. There we go. All right, so let's turn off condo. Let's turn off tax code on here. It's already here, but so what I'm going to do is not having a record. I'm going to destroy this. I'm going to start editing. I'm going to take these three. I'm going to do a merge. Let's go to edit merge. I'm going to merge these polygons together. I don't care which one it is. I don't want to keep the originals. I want to do them into an existing feature. There, good, there it is. Okay. I now have these lines in here. And I want to go to these lines and delete these lines. And I want to delete that point. See how quickly I can destroy the integrity of that? Yes, I love it. All right. There should have been applauding. Come on. All right.
It was there. We were just all muted.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I can break something faster than anybody else can. All right. So one of the things that we were talking about beforehand is I sort of teased out there. Does anybody know how to go and georeference something inside of Pro? And have you ever seen it being done? It's actually fairly simple to do. All right. So I'm going to go and turn this off, turn this off. I want to get down to bare minimum here. All right. So in order to go and bring it in, I actually have a folder. This is the folder that we're using right now. Is it in the fabric? Is it in the fabric training? No, it is not. So let me go. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to go to I'm going to go all through my folder scheme. Training sample documents. And this is the JPEG that I created. So the first thing is it has to be a JPEG or a TIFF in order to go in and bring it in. And yeah, just go ahead and build pyramids. We don't care. So it now is here. Unknown coordinate system. So it's got to figure out how to do it. So let's start with this. When you drag an image into ArcGIS Pro, in order to go to georeference it, the first thing you need to do is you need to go and select that layer in which it's located. Because as you select on a layer, it actually goes and modifies the layer on here. And in this case, when I select the layer, I can go to the imagery. This is an imagery layer. And on the imagery layer, I have georeference. Georeference actually brings up its own tab here on the ribbon. This is the georeferencing tab on side here. So in order to get there, I first had to select on the layer, then I went on imagery, then I went to georeferencing to pull this up. Okay. I can then tell it go ahead and fit to display, in which case it will go and bring it into approximately the same display that I had previously. Again, it tells me that it's georeferencing. I've got no real control points yet. And now it's just like ArcMap. All right. The most difficult part, believe it or not, on this was figuring out how to get to that georeferencing ribbon. Really. Now, all I need to do is I need to go and add control points. So in this case, I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to say, I'm going to wait for it to, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go and say that point goes here. And by default, it's going to try to automatically set itself. And now I'm going to go and say that this point on the scan goes to this point here. And it's going to go and redraw itself. And then I'm going to go over here. And I'm going to say that this point on the scan goes to here. And once I have 3 of 3, it should start showing me some statistics on here. Because all I really want to do is I just want to be able to go and read it from behind here. All right. Literally, if I want to accept this, all I have to do is say save. If I want to go and look at my control point table, I can call that up. It will show me what my control points are, what my residuals are in here, what sort of transformation I have. In this case, I can just save this out, and it actually will save out. Let me go back here into this so that we can actually see it. Saves here a JPWX, a world file for me. That's what it's actually saving at, as a world file for me. That world file actually contains the coordinate offsets, scaling, the rotation to make it go and fit. All right. That's all there is to it. We say save. We can then go and close the georeferencing if we want. All right. We can close the georeferencing component on here. It removes the georeferencing points in here, and it is now georeferenced for that image against here. Does anybody have any questions or any concerns on here? See, the problem is your data is so good. It might be structured differently, but it's so good. There's not a whole lot I have to do in here. But I'm looking at this 173.03, 173.03. This is 550, the same here, 428.05. This in here, I don't see anything on this. 145.95. Oh. There's 268.94. Looks good. The bearings might be off. 77.35. 03. 373.98. 90 feet. Yeah. So I can go through and build this whole thing here with it. You tell me whether you want me to go through that effort, and we could do that. I could do that. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. All right, let's do it. Got nothing but time. So again, going back here, how do we do this? Well, first we're going to do is we're going to create a record. Then we're going to input the subdivision boundary using a traverse tool. We're going to close the boundary or close the traverse. We're going to create seeds. We're going to create the subdivision polygon, align that polygon, clip out underneath, attribute the subdivision. Okay. Once we're done with that, we're then going to go in here and do either tax lots or whatever we're going to do. We're going to go through a second process. All right. We're good with this? All right, so let's go and create a new record. And this new record can be whatever you want. Practice sub. All right, record type. This is a subdivision. Recording date, I would populate that and hit create. By the way, does anybody want to follow me on this? Or do you rather just watch me? Christy says that she'd rather watch me, only because it gives me the ability to make mistakes and she's not paying attention. So, all right.
Yeah, I think,
Okay.
Frank, you could have us do it. You'd have to sort of say, okay, now take the next 15 minutes and, do something and let's reconvene.
Yeah.
Because it's we're going to miss stuff if you're talking and we're trying to do it at the same time.
And that's one of the problems with having a hands-on demo or hands-on hands-on lab as part of the training. It's always that lag, and I explain what I want to do, and then I show you how to do it, and then I have you do it, and there's always that lag in here. And I've always found that there's some value, but usually it's one-on-one when I have that value. So
I think the key here is the recording, right?
that's exactly right.
My saving grace as I'm
That's
going through this this is going to be a really good recording later to have.
That's exactly right. So I've created the sub. My next step is to go and create a traverse file. All right, so I will turn on traverse file, and oh, my subdivision doesn't appear here. Why does it not appear here? Because it's not editable right now, because it's not turned on. I have to turn it on for it to appear in this drop-down list. Now I have my subdivision lines on here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to look to see, is there a line? And I notice there's a difference in here. Is there a line that there's an agreed upon, either the legal description starts and says that everything is assumed here. The initial point bearing south of the point, marking northeast corner of it, subdivision of record, thence along the north line of said parcel is to a point. All right, so this has 745, which is, I don't see any of these, which has that. So I'm just going to set my ground to grid to be any of these on here. Let's just use this bearing here. All right, and make sure that it references the same. It looks almost like it's the same, so we'll see. So the next,
it also says initial point there as well.
Thank you. Thank you. See, you did decide to talk. All right. So again, it's 18, 50, 35. And this is actually, it says northeast, but it's actually southwest. If I'm heading from the initial point down to here. So I'm going to go southwest, and then I'm going to go to next, and I'm going to click on the line. And I'm on the edge of the line, and the edge of the line. Again, the reason why I did that is I wanted to make sure that it captures the bearing of the way in which I'm going to be rotating around. And now when I set my point, by the way, what happened to my ground to grid? I'm not started the COGO enabled tool yet. It's only when I go and actually start on it does that become active. All right. So now let me go in and start with this. I'm going to expand this a little bit more. All right. So it is, let's turn off these old lines, these old labels in here. All right. 18, 50, 35 southwest for, make sure that I've this. And my distance is 268.94 feet. All right, every time I input something, it creates a line. So it's out now actually creating subdivision lines and labeling them with the COGO values that I input. 77. 0.35, 43, and that is 77.35, 43, and that's actually northwest because I'm going that way instead of the other way. All right, and that's for a distance of 145.95 feet. All right. My next distance, by the way, please interrupt me at any point here. If you have a question or a comment, want to talk about why I might be doing something different than what you normally do. All right, on here, by the way, I just put the shorter difference between here and here. Often when we're building the subdivision poly, we'll use that entire longer distance and then split it for the parcels. But again, that's depends upon what you're used to using and how you normally go and do it. In Florida, the Department of Revenue wants to see the long distance, not the individual short ones that are broken up. That gets related to the lot lines, not to the subdivision lines. So I'm going to repeat that bearing, and it's going to be a distance of 90. Notice when I repeated the bearing, it had that asterisk in front of it. All right. Oh, a spiral curve. The spiral curve. Let's see what I can do on this. So someone help me with the way that it's referenced here. Spiral curve, the core distance is that. All right.
I don't see an out radius.
I don't either.
I think you're hosed.
I think I am. Can we at least allow me to go and just make it a standard curve instead of a spiral curve?
I typically just put in the chord if I don't have that kind of data.
That's exactly what I'm going to do. Yeah. So I'm going to put in a chord of 8501.00, and that's again northwest. All right. My distance is going to be in the distance field. I'm going to store 0 for a curve. The radius depends upon whether it's a right or to the left. In this case, this is to the right on here. So
the bearing shows 86 versus 85 degrees. Just
thank you.
Comment.
Thank you. Thank you for catching that, Donna. I'm often looking in different places while I'm typing, so thank you. So the chord distance here is 400 feet. Is this the radius on here? 402, or is that's the arc length?
402 is going to be the arc length.
Yeah, that stuff in parentheses is the center line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah, we're going to have an issue here because in order to build a curve, you need the radius on here. So I might have to just input the chord here and leave it at that. So this is 400.20. That's not right. Spiral, maybe that is 87.
Yeah, that's
40,
a spiral
12.
chord.
So the center line chord is 8601 to here, and it should be to the center line.
Well,
And-
that's the values of the center line. You want the stuff that says spiral chord there on the top.
Okay, thank you. 87, 40, 12 northwest, and 402 point, excuse me, 402.42. Okay, better, thank you. And then we have 109.24. And this now northeast, 10.18 feet. And then we have a curve, long chord bearing, 14.5737, and that's southwest or northeast. So 14.5737 northeast, and that is a CB chord bearing. And this is a curve, a regular curve. So my distance is 0. My radius is 352.47 feet, and it's positive because it's curving to the right. And then the next value is 26.2640 D for delta angle on here. All right, it tells me that my tangent bearing is 28.1057, 28.1057 on there. So that means that input was correctly 125.95 feet. All right. And now the same chord bearing. By the way, as I move the focus over, it's changing where it's actually inputting things. So 173 is to the 0.03 is to the top of here, right? And now it's 87.4220.
That's a record.
Excuse me, yeah, sorry. 87.3854, and that's northeast or south, northwest or southeast, so it's 550 is the distance. And then finally 57.4417, and this is southeast, 428.05 feet. And it closes to within 1500s.
The last bearing, Frank, is 35, is 35 seconds. or actually check your last bearing. It's 57, 45, 35.
Thank you. Yeah, 45, 35, and that is southeast, and this using different notations. I can do that. And it closes within 100th. Thank you, Donna. Donna, can you watch what I'm doing all the time?
Frank, that'd be an awesome job.
Wouldn't that? Wouldn't
It
that?
would be a perfect job in my world.
You know, yes.
Frank,
Yes. Yes,
as
sir.
someone who gets criticized by Donna a lot, given my tools, I'm not sure you want that. She
Oh,
finds
you hurt my
everything.
feelings.
I think she's really good at
Yeah, I know, but she finds
keeping us-
everything. There's
Yeah.
nothing to hide. It's
Yeah.
she is very, very good. Absolutely.
I believe you. All right, so I'm done. Because it has a tolerance of closure tolerance of 1 foot, it automatically closed on here. On that. All right. So what do I do next? I get off of the traverse tool. I click on the right arrow, get off of the traverse tool. I'm done with that. All right. If I were to go and turn off this and turn off my tax lots, I would only have my subdivision poly here. All right. So, yeah, I've got subdivision poly. Those are all part of this current record on here. My next step, build a seed and then go ahead or create a seed and then go ahead and build it. All right. So if I look at the attribution, this is now what's the name of this, and I'm just going to call it name. All right, and I'm good with that. Yep. All right. So I have that turned on. Good. I'm now going to go and look at aligning this parcel. Are we good? Any questions? Aligning this parcel.
So you wouldn't put your lot lines in yet, correct?
Not yet. The way I'm going to do is I'm going to build the outer polygon, the outer container. I'm going to make sure it fits. I'm going to clean out everything else underneath it. And then I'm going to start building my lots and my lot lines and everything in there.
If you didn't have grid to ground on, would the lot lines still close correctly? I mean, if you rotate it a little bit, will they?
This is 2 degrees. So the answer is no. No, I would want to make sure that whatever gets stored according to that. Matter of fact, thank you, Donna. I'm going to show you what that difference is on here. All right. So when I go and build these, I'm going to turn that off, and you're going to see that it's not going to overlay on top anymore because it's now actually rotated 2.5 degrees instead. All right. So remember, align parcels is all about doing a couple things. One, let's go in making sure that we add an anchor. We're going to add an anchor here. We're going to put the anchor exactly on where that initial point is. I always try to make sure that when I start my traverse, I start on an existing point on here and go from there. All right, now that I've got that, check my audio device. Why? Can you hear me? Okay, I'm getting information from Zoom telling me that it lost connection to my mic. Okay, so I've got a 5 foot distance here, and looking at your data where it overlaid, that's plenty. And one of the things I said the other day is that in order to use the align parcels tool, you want to have a couple things. One, you want to make sure you have an anchor point before you start this. And then 2, before you tell it to generate links, make sure you set your tolerance. My common practice is you set it to the same thing that this link tolerance is. So you go and you set it to 5 feet. Now that you've done that, now you've got your anchor here and you've got your tolerances so they match one another. Now you can tell it to go ahead and generate the linkages between there. And when we go in here to see if there are any linkages, and remember the other day, we actually showed that it actually is displaying, because of the way I copied it in here now, it's actually displaying that there is 0 foot difference between here. On here, so it's less than 1/100th of a foot is what's actually displaying in here. So let me go to someplace over here. Let's see with this one here. The links that it's generating actually do and should be displaying. There's a 0 in here. If we open up the links, we can see that it's actually telling you whether or not it's generated, or with symbology, whether or not I created and digitized it, and it does go and display that length up there. All right. So let me go back out to here. It looks like it included everything in here. Everything in here. All right. And it is set to show the preview. Now the decision is, which way do we adjust it? Do we adjust it old to new, new to old?
We always keep new good, so old to new for the most part.
Okay.
99% of the time, I'd say.
So if that's what I'm going to do, I need to make sure that I can select the new or select the old. So I'm going to turn on my condos, turn on my lots, turn on my tax code. I'm going to turn them all on, and I'm going to say toggle to the surrounding. And it will go and tell me what it's going to do. 3 tax lots. It's going to do a tax code in here also. That's what's going to get adjusted to the new location. So you may ask, well, why isn't it showing me the lines or the points in here? Okay. Because it's actually going to go and move those lines and points using the map topology that's built in here. So again, this is topology here. This topology is the rule base to help you define it. But remember, we said it was only structural topology. This is actually a combination of map topology and the rules that are in there. So it will go and move your lines and your points to match that. We good? Good? Okay. Let's go ahead and align this. So one of the things when you do an align parcels, and when you do a transform, which is what this tool actually is that it immediately goes and clears out your linkages and your anchor points in your feature classes. Those are temporary feature classes for your use. All right. So just recognize, don't put anything in there you want to keep. Every time you do this tool, it wipes them out. All right. Real good. I'm now going to figure out what can I cut out of here. So I'm going to select and say there's a tax lot here. There's my subdivision I just built. There's a tax code here. All right. So I'm only going to select my subdivision. By the way, I can go back here. And I can tell that does not show my tolerance anymore. So remember I said there's no condominium that's near this. So I'm going to turn off my condos. I have tax lot and I have tax code. There's no lots underneath here. There's no subdivisions under here other than the one I just did. We good? We're all comfortable with the alignment we did up to this point. At this point, I'm going to cut out whatever this is on top of. All right. So I'm about efficiency. I'm about doing the least number of steps because I understand what each of these steps does. So there is an option that says you can clip everything that is editable. So the reason I went in and I did a select inside here is I wanted to know what was underneath here. What was I selecting? And with that, I can say, hey, take my subparcel and clip out everything that it overlaid on top of, everything that was there. I can tell, go ahead and clip, boom, it's clipped out now. Done. All right. Now I can turn the code off. I can turn the tax lots off. That is my sub that I have right here. That's all I have here. If I could turn my sub off and go to my tax lots, there's the tax lots and it's cleared out of what's underneath there. Tax code is the same way. It's been cleared out of what's underneath there. But there's my sub. We're all good, right?
Frank,
Well,
could
other
we look
than-
at tax lot history? Sorry.
I would say other
Ah,
than cutting out the tax code, that was probably bad.
okay, so I don't understand what a tax code is. So yeah, sorry about that. Sorry about that. But yeah, there's a historic tax lot. And then I go to tax code and turn that on, and there's my historic tax code. Shouldn't have done that. You're right.
Because
I-
tax code's an administrative boundary.
Sorry. Somebody should have told me to.
Tax codes are the taxing districts.
Okay. Okay. Somebody should have told me that. No,
Yeah,
I'll
sorry.
accept. I'll accept responsibility for it. So okay, I have my subdivision. Let's keep moving forward on this. But yeah, you can see.
Can I just, before, sorry, Frank, can I ask one question?
Yes.
And I apologize if I'm dragging everyone else down. I'm just trying to catch up on the notion, if we have a record and the record is a polygon, my thinking to this, point was, the record could be the polygon that is the subdivision or the plat. And is it not the aggregation of all the component polygons? And if so, why create this when you could create all the individual parcels and then you end up with a record that is the equivalent of what you've just drawn?
So the difference is that I'm opening up the actual field definitions for this, and you've got a record type here. All right, which is the record type, the type of different records in here. If you were always going to have subdivision polygons as your record type, I would say, yeah, that's a good idea. But because you have all these different types of records in here, it's not a great idea. If that was the only thing you were going to do, yeah, that would be acceptable, because you're right in that assumption that, in fact, the record is a polygon, and that polygon does reflect the overall boundary of all the components that make up that polygon, all the polygon components that make up that boundary. So yes,
Yeah.
it is. But because you intermix inside the records what types of things those are, it might be a little bit more difficult to go and do that. You then have to start going and doing the definitions for display layers, and it gets more complicated for them.
So Frank, we have tested out in a couple, and again, what we've done is just what Thomas said, is that subdivision is a line type in the reference feature class. So Tom, what you could do, if you didn't want to have a subdivision, what we've just created here, you could take that outer boundary and do a copy paste special and paste it into your reference lines so you then cartographically have your subdivision boundaries in the reference feature class. You
That's
could
what I
do
was-
that. Yes.
Yeah, because I was working from the old ArcMap and looking at it and going,
Yeah.
I know what we do currently. Is this a new, are we all going to be using a subdivision
Again,
or parcel type?
all I asked Frank to do in this particular example, though, is to show you if we had, because some counties have
Some counties
created-
do.
Some counties do. They maintain
Yeah,
the
okay.
plats. We elected that in our original design back way when, And then relooking at it again recently was that there weren't enough folks that were saying that a subdivision transaction management environment to do subdivisions, plats, and lots were not there. But again,
Okay,
I
I
wanted
get it.
Frank to show what it was like if we did want to add that. So again, Frank, sorry, jumping into the cartography again.
And
Well,
so
that's-
for our workflow, it'll be let the record do the work to create the poly. Then you can just snag that poly and bring it over, or snag the lines off that poly and bring them over into.
And I'll talk about that briefly tomorrow. And on that, I'm going to have to go, Frank, so I won't be detracting from your stuff because this is very
Dean?
cool.
Yeah. Well,
It
you'll
is
get the
very cool,
recording.
and thank you, Frank. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's all right. These are great discussions. I'm going to tell you that I'm a data snob. All right. Because yes, you can kind of create lines by taking polygons and doing paste special into a line feature class. You might even go and split those into COGO lines. But what you will lose is you will lose any ground to grid correction or anything that might have happened to that line. You're not going to get any of that when you go and do that. Now, if that's not important to you, that's great. That's a very efficient way to go and do it. But again, I'm a data snob. I wanted to stop and record what I'm doing. It's important to me that I know and I can go back, if whether it's me or whether it's my team or anybody, what actually happened. Why is that like that? That sort of thing. Why is it different? So go ahead.
What we've ran into is if you do the picture of the lines now, if you move those lines, maybe the same thing Frank here is saying, if you move the lines slightly, they're not on top of each other anymore. You lose that relationship
Right.
between the two lines. That's what I've seen, and I'd be more apt to build it later after I've rotated and things like
Yeah.
that in place.
Yeah.
But
And
just a comment.
if you use update COGO, it's going to give you the COGO values, both the bearing and the distance of that rotated line. And it's not going to give you anything as far as whether or not there was a ground to grid on there. Yeah, that's, again, if the juice may not be worth the squeeze, that's all. All right. So we're here, we've got the subs, we're good with that. We're going to build lots out now. So in order to do that, I'm going to go and call up this again. I'm still using the same record. So here's one of the things that always is part of the discussion. Matter of fact, I even have it here. Here, creating tax lots or the individual lots, what's in there. Do you create a new record for the lots themselves? Or do you reuse the records on here when you're going and building it? And there's no right or wrong answer there. It depends upon how you think of this. Is this one subdivision that includes the overall subdivision poly, the individual lots, the lines that are associated with it? Is that it, all of it? Or is the subdivision one reference and then the lots are a second reference? And again, a lot of it is thinking about, do I have, for example, a hyperlink from my records over to the actual recorded documents where I can pull it up and see it? In that case, maybe I want to use the same record again. And I want to keep saying everything that's on this document is right now. This is what I did to create that. All right. It's an interesting discussion. I'm going to use the same record on here. And I can tell you that my team, we've had very heated discussions. What do you do? How do you do this? And why do you do it? We get passionate about this too. All right. So I now have subdivision poly. That's what's selected on here. If I go and say, okay, select the features for the current record here again, just to show me the points. Oh, it only created 2 points in here. Why is that? It reused some existing points. It was close enough to some existing points. It reused them, rather than creating new ones on here. Points, if there's an existing point, it will use that instead of creating a new one. Points are slightly different from lines and polygons. Points can be reused all the time and will be used all the time. So it doesn't automatically put new points on top of points on top of points. It's only, you know, the lines and the polygons. So here it is here. All right. I'm going to now do copy lines 2. And I'm going to do it to my lot layer. Again, if I'm doing it to the same layer, it marks historic. If I'm doing it to a different layer, it just goes and moves them over from the subdivision lines and subdivision polygons. It copies them into lot lines and lot polygons. And when I get done with this, my selected features will be lot lines and I have a lot seed right there. We good? Okay, next thing. Let's start looking at building these lines in here. I'm going to use the traverse tool. I could do it any way I want, but I'm going to use the traverse tool. And this is going to be lot lines. I'm going to start at one point here. Again, my ground to grid immediately comes into play. And I get in here and I tell it 84, 20, 32, and that's south to east. And 998.17. Again, I could do it in 2, but I'm not going to. And then I'm going to go over here. And I'm going to notice it's not right. It doesn't close. Why doesn't it close? Bearings and distances are all rounded. Those rounding cause, they mean things, okay? So what do? This is the reason why I use the traverse tool. I said set my closing point to here, and it automatically will close it to there. So it's an interesting technique, and I know it's something different than what you normally might do, but it's one of those things where if you're paying attention and you want to make sure that this goes and automatically closes and automatically gets set up the way it's supposed to, you're going to want to do that, use this technique. All right, now I'm going to go and divide this line. Going to take and divide the line. I'm going to unselect that here. I'm going to divide the line. Going to divide it by distances. In this case, there's the start. Here's the distance. So I'm going to do it here by 2 different distances, by multiple distances. My first distance from the start, 420.27, 420.27. My next distance is 530. The next distance is going to be 577.90. When I do that, if I scroll down, it tells me how much is left over. In this case, it's 0. I'm going to go and say, hey, for anything less than 0, let's just make sure we distribute it proportionally. It goes and distributes it proportionally, goes and automatically calculates COGO on here. Now you're going to see me do the same thing here. I'm going to go to Traverse, go to Lot Lines, click on here, start at that point, use my ground to grid, go 607.20 northeast for 258.85. Going to zoom into that. And I'm going to make sure that I set my closing point to there. Okay, so I'm going to ask you tomorrow, please have somebody say that that was interesting enough that I spent my time doing that to show you that's the sort of thing that Ted experienced, where when you do a divide along a long line, sometimes it doesn't exactly match up. That's because you have to make sure that you do that anytime you're taking long lines and dividing them. All right, I'm gonna be done here. My next step, create the seeds. I have 1 seed, 2 seed, 3 seed. That's exactly what I thought I should have on here. All right, any questions? No, good.
I feel like we talked about this before, but do we need to adjust that seed at all? So it's not like, so it's where like sort of more center to it, or is it fine with where it's at since it's inside that third parcel?
So let me say, the seeds are, yeah, they don't care. They're ambivalent. They don't care. Yeah, as long as it is on the correct side of the line that forms them, they will expand seeds out to become the true polygons that they are. You don't really have to worry about it. You do if it's on the line. If it was on the line, I would say, yeah, definitely select that and move it. But you're far enough off. We're far enough off on this, and we don't need to do anything with it. Good question, though. You don't have to center the seeds at all. Yeah, I like that question. All right, now we go and build on here. So we now have built, if I look at my attributes, I now have got all of these lots. What is this lot here? Oh, that's the one, that's the seed there. Let's go in and unselect that. So here's my 3 lots in here. Let's go and show off by using a different tool. Let's use the sequential number. And let's choose this. This is our lot layer. Lots. It's in the name field. Let's just make it parcel. Well, sorry. Parcel, name field, parcel, a space. By the way, the formatting of this, the number of pound signs, the number of hashtags you put in here are the number, that's the amount of padding that's going to happen. If you only put 1 in there, it's only going to show 1. If you put 2 in there, it's going to show 0, 1. If you show 3 in there, it's going to go 0, 0, 1 as you go through. So the number of pounds signs there, that's how many characters or how many iterations it's going to put in there. And it's going to start on 1. All right, let's mix this up. It's going to start on 3, and it's going to go by a -1. All right, so now I tell it here, 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 double click. There it is. Now when I zoom in here, all right, let me go and make sure my labels are turned on. Labels are turned on. I don't know what I'm actually labeling here. Partial in here, yeah. Let's take that out and just let's label the name field. All right, and all sorts of extensive labels here. All right, let me make sure. Parcel 1, parcel 1, parcel 2, parcel 2, and parcel 3. Parcel 3. Okay, because we use that big polygon to clean up and align and clip out, we don't have to do anything else with that. This will now automatically fit in with everything else. All right. Now, tax lots. We have tax lots on top of here. Let's turn our tax lots on. And now I'm going to take these 3 lots and make them tax lots. How do I do that? Come on, Christy.
Use the copy lines too, or it's one way.
Copy lines too. It's again, I'm efficient, or shall I say lazy? That's not, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. So instead,
Copy duplicate.
copy duplicate, maybe, but there's actually this duplicate parcels. This duplicate parcels allows me to go and set, where am I going to copy this to? I'm going to copy it to tax lots. It will take whatever polygons I have, copy the polygons into that new layer, and copy the lines associated with those polygons over to the new layer. All right. Again, I'm lazy. I want to do it in the least number of steps, and I want to make sure that it does everything it can. Let the software work for me rather than me working for the software. So now I'm just going to do a duplicate parcels, bring them over. And now let's turn off history here. Here is my 3 tax lots. They're numbered 1, 2, 3. I can use sequential numbering if I want, or I can just go and attribute these however I want to at this point. All right. So just to go through this process, first thing we did is we created the big polygon. We created the overall subdivision parcel, created a record, input the boundary using the traverse, closed the traverse, created a seed, built the subdivision, aligned it to make sure there was no overlaps or gaps, clipped it, and then attributed it. The question I often get when I do this is that, Frank, why do you go from the big outside into the in? Okay. Does anybody agree that that's the way to do, or should I build all the lots and then go and make a subdivision poly? I want to engage you. Come on.
I agree. I would also do, if there's a right of way, do outer right of way and then lots. I don't know what anybody else, if other people do it different or.
So again, I'm coming from a surveyor's education. I understand that often your overall group of tracks may not exactly match the previous measurements, and that you might have overages or shortages inside of there, and that you may need to proportion them. By going and building the overall big area, you have isolated that overage or shortage between there and said, okay, this is it. Now you adjusted that to fit and say, okay, now this contains all the overages or shortages inside of here. And now when I build things so that it fits inside of here, it will automatically apply those within that bigger unit. This is a technique called error isolation. And it goes and makes sure that the errors don't get pushed outside of what's actually confining them, but it gets built around the overall big area here. Now, once I've done that, then by going and taking that boundary and building the smaller tracks inside of there, it automatically will go and proportion it to fit inside of that subdivision. All right, so it's a way to automatically begin to do that, because if I were to go and build it from the inside out, if I didn't realize it, there is, again, I go back to this, there's rounding on distances, rounding on the bearings. And rounding is not your friend. It may make it easier, but it's not your friend because it accumulates. Sometimes it goes and goes and dissipates back and forth. Other times it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So if I were to go and create a series of parcels, even just a little bit of error on one, by the time I start to one and go all the way to the end, I might be completely off. I might be a foot tenths off, whatever. I might be very off, especially bearings also on here. So it's never a good idea to start from the inside and go out. There's one caveat, or maybe there is a good time to do that. So if you're building it from the overall subdivision plat, don't go from the inside out, go from the outside in. But if you have a CAD file that you know is geometrically correct, you can select those lines and copy those all at once because those have already been defined as what that geometry is, and use those and copy and paste those in so that they automatically will go and be correct. All right, it'll include that proportion. So I do the subdivision, then I'll go in there and I'll process it, and I'll then take that subdivision polygon and I'll split it up into these smaller tracks, roads, lots, water management tracks, whatever I have inside of there, and build those out. Okay. Distributing overages inside of here. Within a subdivision, you can go and utilize this. And this is just showing you that if I use these varying distances on the divide of line tools, I can actually tell it how to go and distribute if I have an overage or a shortage on there, and it will distribute those proportions within there. Okay. Are we good with that? Hopefully that was worthwhile. Somebody say, yeah, thanks for doing that. Okay. All
So
right.
I'm just gonna, one little thing about the way you did that, Frank. So usually when I'm drawing those internal lines on the traverse, I'll go ahead and set my closing first time so I'm not fighting snapping. And then B, if you always do it that way, you should theoretically never have topology errors.
That's exactly right. That's a great idea. I don't think of it that way. I always think I want to see how close it is before I go and do that, and I'll go in and snap it. But you're right. If you set your starting point and your closing point before you actually start inputting them, that's a good idea to go and do that. Thank you.
I mean, zooming is fun, but save yourself some time.
It's so much faster, right? Inside of Pro than it was in ArcMap. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent point. I like that. Okay. Any other comments on here? No. So we are now 3 hours and 15 minutes in, and I can see some of your faces. And I had this discussion with Dean. How long can somebody actually sit in front of a screen, all right, without getting completely mesmerized? No matter how good the speaker or the trainer or the teacher is, it's hard to do, to spend a whole long time. I'm aware of it. That's the reason why, by the way, I ask you to turn your webcams on. I want to see what are you engaged in? What are you understanding? What are you not understanding? So we have some options here. We can continue. I've got still slides in here. We can talk about and discuss a little bit more what we've learned today. We can have some of you try to do what you do and me observing your desktop. And that's kind of fun to watch somebody else stumble, right, Donna? So where would you like me to go with this on here?
would have like a 10-minute break to let us play a little bit, maybe come up with questions? Would that be
Perfect.
beneficial? But what does the group think? Though I mean, just take a little bit of a 10-minute and then come back and maybe have and play and have questions.
That sounds fine with me. Does anybody else want to do that?
We got a thumbs up from Ivan, so I'm.
Sounds good.
Yep, that was me with the thumbs up.
Okay, let me pause the recording and let's take a 10-minute break. So we'll come back here at just about 25 after the hour. All right, and please have more questions, more things to talk about. All right, thank you. So one of the things we were just talking about during the break is some of the techniques to handle temporary annotation and some of these other components on here. And I'm trying to look through here. These are parcel dimensions. That's no, that's not what I want. This is not what I want. We actually have a series of workshops in which we went through this. Adjustment slides. I'm so sorry. In which maybe this was it. Why am I not seeing anything there? So Ted, you were talking about some of the things you were doing. Are you using Arcade to go and do any intersects for Arcade to pull attributions out on here?
I'm not involved with the writing of the script, so I'm not
Okay.
entirely sure. I believe it works the same as the find text tool in the create annotation.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
I
I'm
could
sure
be
that's a
wrong.
bin question. No point in
Yeah.
speculating. We'll see what he says.
Okay. Let's see if I have it here. I think I've been through this before. Let's see here. Because we actually have something similar to that, and that we've been using with some of our clients, in which, but by the way, let's start with this. Your use of construction or scratch layers is exactly one of the things that we recommend always inside of your parcel fabric. Have a scratch layer that you can go and work against, and utilize that as much as possible. So let's go in here now, and this is in fact, it's 1200. So this is another thing that one of our clients is doing, and that he sets, they set different reference scales up for the individual maps for these labels. 1200, come on, he's got it so small. Anyway, so this is a dimension, which is actually a point label, and we're specifically symbolizing this so you can understand that. And inside of here, what we're doing is we've got it set up so that parcel dimensions, here we go. So with parcel dimensions, as we go and click on or close to a layer, it automatically is finding text. And what it does is, if we look at that actual one it did, all it really did is it goes and uses an Arcade script to intersect the closest line, pulls out of that line the COGO distance and the COGO arc length values on there, so that it identifies whether or not it's a curve or whether it's a straight line. And then it also goes and pulls out the angle of the overall line itself, so it goes and makes it parallel with that line. So here's what the angle is. Here's the actual value that's pulling out of here. And it utilizes, this is parcel dimensions. If I go to data design attribute rules, so it basically uses one attribute rule that goes and captures the field that it's going to be utilizing for that text string, and goes and it sets up a buffer, uses a variable to establish a buffer. Then it goes and intersects the line, which is the tax lines, and it pulls the distance and the arc length values in from the buffer. It then goes and determines how many intersections, how many lines it actually intersected, sets the variable to 0, also nulls it out in case there's nothing in here. Then here is where you want to go and look at is it goes and sets the attribute value to be, and this is an if command inside of Acrobat. It says if the arc length field is empty, it means it's a line. So go and take the distance value in here. And then it says, okay, well, go and format it in a certain way and return it, and returns it out. So it goes and figures out whether or not it's a curve or whether it's a line using this attribute rule, and populates that inside of the text string. If you look here, it's actually populating the text string field. And then you have the rotate, which is going to go and populate the angle field. So it doesn't necessarily use the numeric values that are stored in those COGO values. In this case, it actually is doing another intersect here, and it's doing an intersect, and it's calculating, in fact, this case is using the direction field, trying to go and figure out whether it's 180 or not 180, and does a little manipulation in here. It goes and populates the angle field with that. So by using these two tools, we can actually go in here and tell it to go ahead and let's put a label point here. Let me go in and label point here, goes and intersects to figure out whether or not what that value is, puts a label point there, goes and rotates it and angles it. So it doesn't have to be on the line. It can be close enough to the line. Yeah, something like that seems to be acceptable. So if even they can continue to maintain this, even with newer values in here. Let's see if we can find a curve here somewhere. So they can determine from a cartographic standpoint. Again, I don't know whether this has any COGO values in there or not, but we'll see. There's the COGO value, and it goes and actually utilizes the long chord bearing on here, and it calculates that.
And Frank, was this a built-in ArcGIS Pro tool, or was this some custom thing because you pulled up a new project to demonstrate this?
It's not a tool as much as it's just utilizing some of the newer technologies inside here. And to answer, no, it's not built into the fabric even. This is something that we do for our clients, because as we start sort of addressing how are you going to do this in Pro, and how are you going to do this in Pro, and that sort of thing. So yeah, this is just one of the solutions for going and maintaining dimensional information against here.
Awesome.
What's
Yeah, I mean,
interesting?
It's a small bit of arcade. So
Oh yeah, tiny bit. Thank you. I actually wrote it. Tiny stuff. What's interesting is that things like the Harris County Central Appraisal District in Dallas, Texas, they use this same technique, and they were kind of trying to figure out how to develop it. And I happen to be telling Esri that this is what we were doing for some of our clients to solve this problem. They're like, well, can you send us those codes? I said, sure. So we sent it to them, and yeah, they're starting to get known out there that that's what they're doing. That's a way to go and solve this issue, especially as it relates to the fabric. So you don't have to populate everything, but there's only, it does allow you to go and do that. So there's so much inside a pro. When you start looking at arcade and attribute rules, and combining the two, what I challenge people to do is try to think outside the box right now. Try to learn the new technologies and think outside the box, because that can help you to really modernize and help you to figure out what you're going to do. One of the reasons why our clients really like this is that, for example, they might have gone right next to this line here and they said, well, wait a minute, that really is supposed to be, it's only supposed to be 760 feet. They can put whatever value they want in there. Once they've captured it, it just becomes a label there. So you can put whatever value that you want, to the point where you can do something like that. Since it's not a numeric field, it's a text string. You can then go and make it more than what it was before by doing something like that. Yeah. All right. Okay. So where were we? So did anybody get a chance to play anything? Or do you have any questions or anything to discuss about this on how this all fits together? Tomorrow, I'm trying to think. I think we've gone through almost all these slides to the point where you have an awful lot in here. There's a reconstruct boundaries, an interesting tool, but that uses line labels to go and figure out where things fit. Oh, this is really interesting. And let's just go in here. And let's focus on, let's just do this. Let's turn these off. And let's make sure that we have that on here. Okay. All right. So on here, we can see here's the retired by record, the created by record, retired by record. Here's the COGO values that I entered as I was inputting the lots on here. The bearing and the distance. All right. To just sort of verify and make sure that you understand some of the nuances that I kind of often go and just breeze over. The COGO values inside of ArcGIS Pro are not string values anymore. They weren't in the ORMAP Parcel fabric, but in ArcMap, standard COGO attribute fields were string values. They were number fields, or excuse me, they were text fields. Inside of Pro now, and inside of the ArcMap Parcel fabric, they are number fields. The reason they're number fields is because they're beginning to go and start doing analysis against them, so that you can identify, oh, how much does this one differ from the other? And so that these number fields, again, you can tell it and you can tell it what precision you want to represent it at, whether or not you want to have separated stuff. But the most interesting thing is this field here. There's an attribute field on every line feature class inside the parcel fabric called COGO type. We also showed that the COGO ground, rotation, and scale fields, they're populated when you utilize the ground to grid function. Matter of fact, when we go in here, we can look at COGO ground. Yes, meaning there was an adjustment applied to it. The rotation is how much it rotated. And if you remember, it was like a negative 2.5 degrees. That's about what that is. It's rotated 357, 2250. Whether or not there's a scale value set. But this field here, the COGO type field, this actually is dependent upon how the COGO values were derived. All right. So if in fact I entered as the user, if I entered the COGO values, it says this field is entered on here. If, however, it was computed, I shouldn't say computed, that's terminology. If in fact it was updated using the update COGO, that means that was calculated from the geometry on here. But if in fact it was somehow impacted, if it was originally entered and then impacted, so if I do a split or a divide on this, again, this one is right now entered. If I go and do a divide on it, divide doesn't matter, you know, right now I do have a record value in here, but if I go and divide that and say, let's divide it by 100 feet. All right, and from the start, so it's going to start and it's going to go 100 feet is going to be there. I divide it. It then goes and populates 100 here and populates 450 there. If I look at this line, all right, look at the 100-foot here. I look at the line, it now says that that COGO value was entered. This one, the 450, because I entered the COGO of 100, I did not enter the 450. It actually went and computed that value from the line as what it was before. So it's actually tracking not just what values I enter, but what the results might be as a result of this. And one of the interesting things, maybe it's not interesting, but I find it interesting, is that the Department of Revenue requires that you return, Florida Department of Revenue says you have to go and return the lines, and they want to know where do the COGO values on the lines come from. And they hate the fact that they are number values now because they, yeah, nobody from Florida is here. They can't understand why it's coming back to them as 6 decimal places. You can't measure 6 decimal places. How can it be? It's stored in 6 decimal places. Well, so what we do is we automatically go and have a new field in here called dimension. And if the attribute for COGO type is entered, it automatically takes, whether it's a straight line or curve, and copies that value into a dimension text field. So it automatically gives them the value they need. If it is computed and gets changed to entered, it goes and automatically moves it over there also. So by doing that, we're not creating label points, we're not creating annotation, we're rather giving them something on the lines that they can rely upon and say, these are the values that represent the deeds or the plats that are of record out there. All right, so an interesting way to utilize what's built in. There is so much built in now that it's absolutely amazing what's going on. Again, very, very interesting what's actually built into the parcel fabric now, and how it works. All right. Okay, we're now about 12 minutes before noon on your side. What else do we want to talk about? What else do we want to look at? I do have some additional slides at the very end. Let's talk about this. Again, let's leave this for tomorrow. Yeah. There's some quality control components in here, because one of the things we talked about was the fact that the topology no longer is used to find issues with your data. In fact, there's what's called display layers, in which you can identify gaps and overlaps, and then you can go and figure out how to work with them. We also have a couple slides on, let's see, settings we'll also have. So there'll be some slides on how to configure your Pro project so it's much more efficient for you, rather than using the standard the standard default settings and configurations. All right. So anything else? Did you get enough today?
Good stuff, Frank.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, it's so I just wanted to make sure that you got your money's worth. Hopefully, I mean, the state's paying for this, so hopefully you got your money's worth on this. Tomorrow, we're going to wrap it up. We're going to have Dean going and showing us about, from a cartographic model, how do you go and use the information in here, and showing some of the tasks that he's done. I'm going to go over the rest of my slides. We're going to answer questions. We'll see how much we can cover. As long as you want me here, I will stay here and answer your questions and show you tips and tricks if you want. I'm just going to ask you to interact a little bit more with me. All right. You still have homework. And let's go back up to 2 things. You've learned a lot in the last 3 days. So 2 things each on here. And since there wasn't a whole lot of interaction, nobody's exempt. Everybody's got to do it tomorrow. So thank you all. I'm going to put the recording in the folder again. If you want to go and download that recording, that never changes. The links over to them are always there, and you can download the recording and review it again tonight if you want. All right.
That link is, sorry, remind me again where?
Okay.
The original email?
It is, in fact, I'm going to go and put it in the chat window if you want to capture it real fast.
Sure.
Okay. Copy the link. And if I go over to the chat window, turn it off. All right. This is a link over to the actual shared folder inside of Dropbox. And inside of Dropbox, you will have the videos. And those videos goes and gives you the individual. Well, that's actually Dean's videos. The recordings, sorry, under recordings. Here's all the previous recordings. And if you look later on today, you'll find a new one in there too. And you can go and select and download any of those for you. All right. Anything else?
Thank you.
Yeah, Frank, one quick question. Points are related to lines and to lines only, correct? The points are just on the end of lines. It's not polygon related.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Okay. Just a
The
question.
points are on the ends of the lines. Yeah. Yep. That's exactly right.
Thank you,
All
Frank.
right. Thank you. Thank you. And I will see you tomorrow. And thank you, by the way, all of this talking out actually allowed me to work through some of the residual I still had from my food poisoning. So thank you. Cleared up my head a little bit also. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Frank.
All right, have a good one.
Thanks. And let me see here. Let me stop share. And I'm going to end the meeting. Thank you all. Take care.